Okay, the April meeting for Sedona Fire District Governing Board and its members is now in order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence.
13 firefighters and 13 police officers lost in the line of duty last meeting.
Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, well, welcome once again, everyone, to our monthly meeting, and we get to kick this one off with our periodical budget workshop portion for the next 30 minutes or so. So with that, Chief, if you want to open that up and go right ahead.
Yes, sir. Well, good evening, Mr. Chair and Board. And what I'd like to do as we start this budget workshop is kick it off with some introductory comments and then push it over to Director Boldra to go through the details. I know this draft budget, all of you have had it almost 2 weeks. So we're suspecting we'll have some good questions, and obviously we have the executive staff here too. We need to get detail on any of those line items. So I do want to, as we start off, discuss our strategies again, which we have in the past, but I think it's important to understand staff's process and frame of mind as we approach our budget. So to provide a budget accurate to the district's needs, be as effective and efficient as possible from a fiduciary standpoint, forecast district needs into the future, continue to develop and implement initiatives to manage the budget, and also to integrate our strategic plan with our budget. So, I know you're probably getting bored of the fire chief saying that, but this is really what we ground in as staff. We talk about our strategies and how we're approaching our budget, this one included. So, are there any questions from the board before I make a couple more notes just on those strategies? Good, okay. So then I have a handful of notes I want to make, and then we'll pass it over to Director Boldra. So, I want the board to be aware that just to date with this budget, this fiscal year, our staff has been engaged in a very robust process, evaluating each division and also each line item so that we can really manage this budget the best way possible. And you probably noted some of those challenging areas this year. We have in the last couple of months even highlighted a couple of those areas. We do take this responsibility incredibly serious. And I just want to say up front, I am proud of the staff and the work that we've done to date. No, it's not done. We're in draft, but I think we've made some very good progress, and hopefully that is seen. One of the things that I think is making this budget challenging this fiscal year is when I look back at the Consumer Price Index Summary Report that I highlighted a bullet point here, and it says that the all items index continued to accelerate, rising 8.5% for the 12 months ending in March. The largest 12-month increase since the period ending December 1981. So this is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. That was kind of staggering. So for over 40 years, 4 decades, this particular CPI over the last 12-month period when it's being evaluated is the highest increase we've seen over 40 years. I mean, wow. So why would I bring that up? And we have kind of talked about that, but this budget's in that context. You know, we've talked about how Sedona Fire District is not a bubble, and so I think highlighting that, it does emphasize the challenges we're up against. Although those challenges are really across the board here in the country right now. So a couple other things I want to highlight when it looks on the couple of the mandatory areas that legally by law, the fire district has to sustain. One was the workers' comp, and you've seen that number up significantly. You know, there's 2 workers' comp providers in the state. We're in the risk pool. It's high-risk insurance. That's why it's so high. And firefighters, fire agencies, we have to maintain that high-risk insurance. It's legally required. The other legal requirement, and I want to highlight, is the pension costs, how those have gone up. We have to pay into that and keep pace per the statute. Now, why would I highlight those 2 in particular? Because that was $1 million. When we look at our budget year to year, and we do our 10-year projection, and it's typically around a 5% increase, well, $1 million in this budget is a 5% increase. So already from the start, as we structured this budget, we're like, wow, even just managing those 2 areas, you know, that's a challenge. So now let me just camp for a second on the workers' comp. Why is that number so high? Okay, and there's 2 really issues that hit the risk pool. One was the legislation that was passed for cancer presumption for firefighters in the state of Arizona. Now, obviously, we're in support of that. Obviously, that's significant legislation, and we all know, looking at the medical science, firefighters get cancer, and they get cancer, occupational cancer. So I think that was bold for the state to manage that. Although there's a chink in the armor on that one, when the legislators passed that, they did fund the municipal fire departments across the state, seed money to fund that, because when it comes to workers' comp and the high-risk pools, those cancer claims are the most significant. Well, fire districts got left out of that. And so that's one that hit our workers' comp numbers. It goes up. Now, are we in the process of doing some asks with the legislator? Yes, we are. The other component of that was COVID. Now, nobody could have forecasted a pandemic, nor did we control the pandemic completely to where it wouldn't impact us. And I know the risk pool was impacted quite significantly from COVID. So there's 2 things I want to highlight to you as the fire board, really as our political body here in Sedona Fire District, and make sure it's on your radar if it already isn't. But when it comes to that legislation, there's a couple initiatives that we have on the table to try to get some of that funding for the cancer. You know, all of us can contact our legislator, and I think my recommendation to the fire board is, as a board, contact our legislator. Ask why the fire districts didn't get funded. Ask what the legislation's doing about it. We've looked at the numbers. There's money there. It's just there's some hesitation to fund the fire districts with that cancer seed money, we'll call it. The other board I think would be good interaction for our fire board is the Yavapai County supervisors. Chief Johnson from Birdie Valley Fire District, he's structuring an ask to that body. The way some of that COVID relief funding went, it went to the states from the federal government, and then they distributed it to the counties. Well, Yavapai County did not distribute any to any of the fire districts. So a handful of us teamed together under the leadership of Chief Johnson. He's reached out to the 7 county supervisors. We've reached out to our local one to court some time to talk to them about what the ask is. So I think it would be prudent for our political board to interact with our supervisor and say, hey, there's an ask coming for good reason, and there was money distributed to the county COVID relief, but we're confused why it never made it to the fire districts that were out responding and handling COVID during this whole couple-year period. So that's coming. Obviously offline, if you want more information on the approach on that. Just so you know, there's a significant amount of money we identified as COVID cost that is going to be in that ask from Sedona Fire District. Back to those 5 agencies going to the Board of Supervisors, ours was the highest number. Good reason. So, I wanted to camp for just a moment because I feel like staff, we're going to work as hard as we can on this budget. There's a couple of those areas that are without our control, but we as fire chiefs, Our labor reps, we're working hard with the legislator, we're working hard with the county board of supervisors to get those asks out there, get them to respond to us as the fire district. So it would be nice to partner with our political leadership, and there's no reason why it can't be a reach out there and say, hey, this is important for the Sedona Fire District. So I think, I'm hopeful that we can make progress between now and the end of fiscal year with those asks, but I don't know until end game and the political leaders decide whether they'll help fund us or not. So, a couple other, brief bullet points, and then I want to move it on. And, so, one of the other things we're looking at now, and I want to give the board a heads up, is when we look how we, deploy and manage our district, we have a minimum staffing level of 23 firefighters. We also have some additional firefighters on staff that we would call a drop firefighter that we can move around. So we are doing the analytics on that. You haven't seen that in the draft yet, but there's potential that if we hire 3 or 6 firefighters, the cost of that firefighter, instead of paying time and a half for another firefighter to cover positions, actually equalize, it drops the overtime to the cost, right, for that staff. But we believe there's a savings there. So right now, we're finishing up analytics on it. We want to make sure, but I want to make you aware as we walk through a challenging budget, if I say, oh, and we're hiring firefighters, and you're like, what? Well, that would be why. And it wouldn't change our minimum staffing level of 23, but it would create more staff. And a couple of positives on creating more staff is, again, we can reduce the bottom line budget by helping managing overtime, but it also increases our on-duty staffing and more of a pool of firefighters when it comes to training. Some of the training we do with TRT and wildland, we have to do off-duty because it's deeply committed and the firefighter can't respond on calls during that. So having backfill, having firefighters to support that kind of training, we can lower some costs there. We also, it makes more firefighters available for backfill, not just sick and vacation time, but when we get a deployment, for example, on immediate need, we send a Type 6 engine up to the fire up there in Flagstaff. And that's not uncommon. Immediate need means they have some structures threatened, so all the area agencies try to send something. We're able to do that, but then we backfill, right? If that resource doesn't stay up there for a week, you know, the cost kind of gets deferred back to us. But having a better pool of firefighters to backfill, we know we're keep our district staff, but also we can help manage lower those costs. So, and also having a bigger pool of firefighters lowers the time of the battalion chiefs really to, they spend a large part of their shift making sure the district staff and we're deployed appropriately. It's phone calls, it's managing telestaff, it's following up with people, it's looking at pick lists, and having a bigger pool, we can help manage that. So we'll do the analytics on that, and you'll see if we will report out on that. Obviously, if it's going to be beneficial to our bottom line. But I wanted to give you a little backdrop on that so there's an awareness before I say, hey, and I'm going to hire firefighters. Okay. 2 more things. One is, there's a relationship between our strategic plan and budgeting, and so we've followed this real robust process that we stated, where our divisions, our managers, we looked at all the line items, got to the executive with finance, we processed all that. But we really, this budget process is aligned with our goals in that strategic plan. We have a slide later, we'll talk more about strategic plan, but I do want to make a couple comments. The strategic planning includes crafting strategies and defining supporting actions to achieve specific goals. That's what the plan does. A well-formulated strategy helps gauge and distribute an organization's resources based on its known strengths, weaknesses, and anticipated future events. So like when we look at that strategic plan, you see a goal, you'll see as you look through the budget how it aligns. And it's like, oh, well that's why that's in the budget, because we're supporting that goal. Budgeting lends financial strength to the strategic plan is one of the most critical activities an organization undertakes. So when you look at that goal and go, well, how are we going to get there? One of the components is not just how we're going to organize a program or manage goals and objectives or strategies and action items. It's really how we can fund it. Like our wellness initiative, well, we buy equipment for the firefighters to keep it in shape. You know, that's one of those. We make sure that equipment's current and safe, our firefighters can get that physical conditioning in. They're in better condition, they stay healthier, their immune system's up, less injuries, they're ready to go, they're ready to deploy. And the last bullet point on how the strategic plan really integrates with our budget is SFD uses budgeting and strategic planning as essential management tools that affect managerial decision-making. So this budget that we presented to you and those line items align with the 9 goals that we have in the strategic plan. That's our backdrop, that's our process. You know, I've outlined the strategies. So it's important to understand that as we look through those goals. And then, again, the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Director Boldra or entertain any questions on my comments is this is still in process. It's a draft. Like one of those things, evaluating whether we hire more drop firefighters to cover some of the backfill, lower the overtime, increase the wage benefit, but lower the overtime, and the offset is sort of a positive. So those analytics are in the way, and there's several other areas. So from these introductory comments, the strategies and the introductory comments, before I transition to Director Boulder, is there any questions from the board on any of my comments? Yes, sir.
We're going to be meeting, you and I, at a meeting coming up, and just to lay the groundwork, I'd like to expand on those initiatives and the legislation so that I, as an individual on this board, and or collectively with the board, what have you, can speak and articulate the issues. So I took copious notes while you're talking. This is a big deal.
Yeah, and what I'll do is reach out to Supervisor Michaels, and I've requested a meeting with her, with Chief Johnson. And what I'll do is some of those structured comments and bullet points, I'll make sure before that meeting, as I get those from Chief Johnson, I'll make sure that the board has them and see them through. I think that'll help hone some of that down. And then, yeah, we can definitely talk about the legislative initiatives that are on the board right now that you know, we all as voters, I'm going to vote for them, right? I'm in state, you know, they make it to the ballot. But I think it's good awareness, and I think, you know, I don't want it to escape from this fire board how influential you are. Again, myself, the staff, this fire district, we're not really political. I mean, we're operational, and we're neutral because we serve everybody. And we can't make a political decision on a response. The response is the response. We're going to handle and mitigate that. But you as a fire board, when you put Sedona in front of the fire board, in this state, you're a very influential fire board. You're in a very influential area. And my limited experience over the last few years is legislators actually listen to people from here that are in positions like you are. So I think in the next couple of months, tapping into that, I think that could be of some value. And again, will we make progress? I don't know, but I know there's a lot of education that's been going on too. A couple of the supervisors have no idea what a fire district is. Yes, I fell out of my chair when Chief Johnson told me that. I said, what? So, at the minimum, what I think is, as we do these asks, at least if the state legislature, if our county supervisors understand fully what a fire district is and how we're funded in this state, at least there's traction there for an educational component, and as things come up downstream, maybe we get better traction. Not that we won't be successful here. So we can definitely talk more in depth on those.
Thanks, Chief.
Anything else? Thank you, Chief.
All right, thank you, sir, and now I'll turn it over to Director Boldra.
10 minutes.
Yep, it said 30 minutes, so I got 10. All right.
Take as much time as you need.
32 minutes.
Come on, you know, when I get rest, right, I gotta do my job to, you know.
Well, thank you, Chief. Yes, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. You've had, as Chief mentioned, about 2 weeks to kind of review the draft budget, and it is in draft form. Nothing by any means is final here. Obviously still working through a lot of the details, but there are some numbers that are pretty set, and so want to kind of cover what we're working through, some of the details, and go from there. So kind of plan on the presentation this evening is just kind of budget process and update on the schedule, overview of our 2023 expenses and the 2023 revenues, allocation of fund balance, and to me, that's one of these things that comes very important in budget cycles such as this one, when there is a lot of constraints on the operating budget, and we're dealing with a lot of unforeseen items and expenses that have come up, and the strength of our fund balance really allows us to be in a good position to be able to address those issues and move forward and continue to be in a strong financial position. And then the last piece would just be kind of that board direction from what we've presented this evening. As far as budget process, again, just reiterate, what the chief said. A couple of years ago, we really revamped the budget process when Chief Coyle was in kind of the acting chief position, and we really sat down with all the division managers, program managers, and really explained what the budget process was, how to develop a solid budget, a foundational budget, and that has been continued from that budget to today. And now even with the development of the strategic plan and tracking to that, the budget requests that I'm now seeing come forward to finance at the end are well thought out, identify the needs of the organization. Yeah, there's still some wants in there, and there's some areas where we have some flexibility, which we may not be able to, achieve in budget cycles such as this year. But they're also still looking at what are some things we could do to also enhance Sedona Fire above and beyond the needs and the strategic plan. So at this point, we're at the April budget workshop with the fire board. Our plan is after this meeting to take back the feedback, finish the analysis on the staffing, and finish up some things on the capital plan, and by early first week in May, get the full draft budget packet out to the board. Which you remember is the big packet. I mean, you got believe it or not, I gave you the small packet for this meeting. The bigger packet has a little bit more in there, a little bit more on the projection side of things, so you can see how this budget plays out, as well as the full capital plan included in there, and to allow the board time to review and identify things. And then we'll come into the May board meeting, hold another board workshop, update any changes that have been made to the budget from today's presentation, and then ask for tentative adoption. At that point, the budget's still not set. We could still make changes. We have to post the budget for a minimum of 20 days. And then on June, we'll come back and hold a public hearing on budget and ask for final adoption. At that point, you could adopt a lower budget than what was presented. But if we want to raise the budget at that June meeting, then we'd have to repost and then hold another meeting after another 20 days. So fortunately, we have until August 1st to actually have the budget into the County Board of Supervisors. So if for whatever reason this timeline does not match up, we build some capacity within this timeline. Any questions on process so far? All right. So, one of the things I really wanted to highlight, this year is a very, very unique year for Sedona Fire and fire districts, frankly, across the state and across the country, and all of us, actually. It's a very unique year. We're all, whether our personal lives or business lives, dealing with a lot of things that we didn't anticipate would come our way. And start off with some of the external impacts to the budget. These are things that from a finance standpoint, we look at are outside of the control of Sedona Fire. There's nothing that our staff or our community could have done differently to affect these items. Starting off is our PSPS contribution rate increased 3.32%. If we did nothing, if we didn't offer any raises, any step increases, any COLAs, that's a $265,000 impact to the budget. Then we had workers' comp, which was talked at length. And actually, this number doesn't match the number that's in your budget because we got a revised quote after the budget books went out from Securus. But, our proposed rate for next year is $881,000, which is an increase of $460,000 on today. And as Chief kind of mentioned before, unfortunately, whether we like these numbers or not, we're required by law to provide this workers' compensation. Sedona Fire did not have anything to do with the COVID nor the presumptive cancer, but unfortunately, those are two things that the workers' comp risk pool has to cover. And there's a cost and a risk associated with that. And, we're realizing not only an assessment of $273,000, but we're also seeing that increase in our premiums because of that risk associated, with the presumptive cancer. I do have a note, though, that $273,000, if we have to pay that, and I say if we have to pay that, there's some pushes within the legislature to get some funding, cover that for fire districts. But if we have to pay that, our proposal is to have it come out of this year, and basically it'll just impact fund balance.
Why is there an assessment anyway? What is that for?
So essentially, with the risk pool, so when you go out and buy regular insurance, they assess their risk, and they say, this is the maximum you're gonna have to pay. And so they're required to have their own capitalization and their own stop-loss insurance in place to protect them from risk. When we join the risk pool, that risk is now shared by, just as it would be shared by the owner of a commercial insurance company, that risk is now being shared by the members of the workers' comp risk pool. So they paid out more in COVID claims over the last 2 years than they had assessed risk for. So they didn't have insurance in place or the capitalization in place to cover those claims. So now we have to recapitalize the plan back to where the Department of Insurance requirements are for funding of a self-insured risk pool.
That's the value that they came up with?
And that's our share of that.
So does that differ from district to district based on numbers of the number of people?
It does. It's allocated as a percentage of covered payroll, and Chief Mazulis might know a little bit more as he sits on the board. I was just trying to pull up what the total impact was here. So across all the members of the pool, total assessment was $3.6 million, almost $3.7 million.
And that's our share?
And that's our share, yes.
Tell me we weren't the district that had the highest share.
No, we weren't, but we're up there.
I believe we're fifth, if I'm not mistaken.
Just to center on that, to give a little more information too, some information from John Flynn from AFCA, looking at the Securus risk pool, and this helps contextualize what we're talking about too on these impacts, is there's 53 fire districts in our risk pool, which is 39% of the state's 144 fire districts. 26, or 49% of the 53 fire districts in the Securus risk pool are currently at the $3.25 tax rate cap. Okay? That's kind of significant. We are not. 3 of those fire districts are on overrides. So they're beyond the cap where they came to their leaders and follow the legal process to do that. 38 or 72% of the 53 fire districts on the Securus risk pool will not generate enough new property tax revenue at their current tax rate to offset their respective fiscal year 23 workers' compensation costs. So remember, when we get that AV, it helps, that's the tax revenue that helps offset this. Most of us, with that tax revenue, will not generate enough to offset these increases. Again, that's back to that ask of the legislature, is, hey, you're sitting on millions of dollars, none of the relief came to us, it comes to us. So hopefully that helps too, kind of look at the state and how we fit as a district in there.
It puts it in perspective on where we're at and the importance of this assessment.
We're going to have a common theme in my presentation this evening on inflation, but fuel prices was another significant increase, 62%, and that's based on a U.S. Energy Information Administration report that came out. And so looking where we were at, historically and where we're projected to go, that's a $62,000 impact to the budget. Just to re-highlight, Chief's comments on, we're seeing record inflation. Over the last 12 months, it was 8.5% inflation across the board. And that's important because what we're proposing in this budget, and I kind of have it on this slide, is only a COLA of 5.9%. And so when we talk about, the personnel side of the budget, we've got a lot of impacts from a benefit cost standpoint. And not that it's an additional benefit to our personnel, but from the cost to continue to provide the same benefits, it's rather significant. But then we add in a COLA that doesn't even keep up with the inflationary rate that we're seeing over the last 12 months. We are trying to do everything we can to be cognizant of the impacts of all of these things to the budget. Our AV, we saw an increase of 4.7%, so I don't have all bad news on here. I've got some good news on here, which at our current tax rate, $764,000. And then if you remember from my previous presentations, the last legislative cycle, there's a tax omnibus bill that lowered the commercial assessment ratio from 18% down to 16% over the next 4 years. So we're going to see a roughly $60,000 decrease in commercial taxes because of that assessment ratio change. So again, back on this kind of the Cir's comment, there are other districts that are hit much harder by that. Fortunately, our impact's relatively small, but nonetheless, it's still, a decrease in revenue at our current tax rate. So kind of some total dollars, some numbers to take away from what I've just presented there. If we look at just the workers' comp, PSPRS, and fuel, and we don't give any raises and we don't do anything else, we're at a $787,000 increase in the budget if we do nothing else other than just take on those costs for next year. The other thing is if we, again, looking at inflation and using the 5.9% COLA, which is what the Social Security COLA was for 2022, we're at a $1.46 million increase to the budget. And so that's kind of where some of the areas we're starting. I'm going to discuss the other line items in the budget, but this makes up the majority of the increases in this year's budget. The other expenses only make up roughly another $300,000, which I know $300,000 does sound like a lot of money, but on a $20 million budget, it's a relatively smaller percentage of the total picture than these items right here. Any questions on this? I know it's a lot, kind of.
No, I think after going through the budget, as you presented it to us in the package, it seemed that where there were increases, even if we were to take those increases and cut them in half throughout the whole 82-page document, you're still amounting to somewhere around the $500,000 to $750,000, which isn't a whole. It's maybe a penny and a half, a penny on the mill rate. So it's not going to make that big of an impact. So it's putting a pencil to paper and trying to figure out how this whole thing's going to handle.
Right. All right. So let's go kind of diving into the rest of the expenditures and again recapping on some of the personnel side of things. So we did see the increase of PSPS of the 3.32%. Good news, ASRS actually decreased 0.24%. Unfortunately, our ASRS staff, although they're critical to the organization, do not make the majority of our payroll costs. So we did see some savings there, but very minimal in comparison to the public safety pension increase. We do have a proposed step increase for eligible staff along with the 5.9% COLA. You did see in the draft budget, our health insurance did go up 4%, which is actually very good, and one of the areas we're seeing some benefit with a risk pool insurance. We've seen actually a lot of benefit with them over the years. I've got some other clients that were getting renewals in the 10% range, so I was really happy to see only a 4% increase. I think we've discussed the workers' comp at length, but I mean, again, that unfortunately is one of the biggest impacts to this year's budget. Kind of going into, and then as far as the rest of personnel costs, really just maintaining, health evals, continuing the employee assistance program, not a lot of change in payroll. As we mentioned, Chief mentioned, we're still evaluating, potential rovers to help reduce our overtime costs. And that would be something that if we look at and, are able to add in, that'll be something you'll see in the final draft of the budget that comes out. And moving on to buildings and land, not a lot, of change has occurred in here. There's not new programs or new areas of evaluating, changes to Sedona Fire. The overall increase is about $25,000. Utility growth is just based off of, usage, and we analyze a compound annual growth rate on our utility costs to project kind of where our future growth goes on those. And the majority of the growth is in buildings, repairs, and maintenance, and that's due to this inflation. Quotes are coming back from contractors. I think it's a combination of inflation. I think that, and it's more of a personal Gabe opinion than necessarily official, but I think their workload, because the economy has been so strong, it has grown extensively, and now they're able to just throw numbers out there. If you want them to do work, you got to pay the premium. I mean, and so unfortunately, we still have to maintain our facilities, and we're having to bear some of those costs. I do believe, again, our staff does a very good job of shopping, and trying to get different quotes, but unfortunately, we're realizing the increase, and that's why we're seeing the growth in these. Vehicles and equipment. We overall, the increase really driving vehicles and equipment is our fuel increase. Another big area is our personal protective equipment. And again, that's due to the cost quotes coming back from the manufacturers on all of the bunker gear and turnout gear needed. I am happy to say we did have a small decrease in vehicle maintenance, and if Chief Mazulis wants to add anything to that.
Just based on, past 3 years of usage and recognizing some efficiencies with some different shops, with turnarounds and things like that. Hoping to see more of that going forward. And in addition to it, because of our capital replacement plan, we've got newer apparatus where we're not having the maintenance needs. We had a couple of years with the 2008 ambulances, for example, they were a Ford Lemon. So, we had to replace motors on those and things like that. So, the new Ford product, we're not seeing those issues, so we're recognizing some savings. And then small tools and equipment was another area that kind of had, again, some larger growth in comparison. And again, there are needs for office furniture. Unfortunately, these chairs don't last forever and get heavy use, as well as expansion within the CRR program. And Chief Booth, I know, has a lot going on in there and a lot of vision for the program, and if she wants to add a little bit to that.
So yes, the increase in the CIR budget, we've got a very small group of people that are very qualified and very ambitious. Our qualifications and our public outreach. So one of the things that hasn't really been touched in CIR, especially with COVID over the last couple of years, is bringing us up to date with the state who adopted the 2018 code series. So we costly to do it properly and make sure that we get everything correct, and more public outreach. So.
Communications and IT, we have our 5% increase in our dispatch cost, and that's per the IGA. Another big area is our computer software and support. The Office 365 mitigation is a little bit more expensive than our previous systems. But obviously has greater security, blue card training, and just other software increases. I mean, I can go line by line on the softwares, but it's really what's driving that is renewals on the programs that we use every day to keep the organization running. Meetings, travel, and training, increased based on, minimal training during COVID over the last couple of years. So now it's time to get our personnel well-trained and back out. And there's not only, an increase of about 9% for actual training programs, but again, a larger increase of about 25% for travel-related expenditures towards training. Again, we're seeing hotels, airfare, fuel, for travel is all up across the board. And, so again, I'd say, I actually appreciate, the staff here at Sedona actually looking at that and not just saying, well, I'm gonna ask for what I've asked in the years before, and not recognizing the fact that these costs have gone up, and we need to make sure that we account for it accordingly if we're gonna continue through the programs and follow the training that's laid out for the district. And then finally, managerial expense. A lot of that maintained across the board on our managerial. We did get our increase in liability insurance, and Director Robinson, I don't remember that number off the top of my head, but I think it was about 6%.
5, if I recall.
Yep.
Look that up to make sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, that's not been built in. We had a placeholder in the draft that's before you. We also had an increase just in professional services, both ambulance billing, based not on a percentage basis, but projected additional revenue, finance as well, and then with our current staffing issues within IT, the majority of that increase in managerial professional services, being able to use some outsourced IT work until we're able to bring in staffing. And one of the things that was done is one of the FTEs within the personnel budget was reduced to kind of account for that and kind of balance some of that out. 0.52% increase on our professional liability insurance. So that's good to see, because it cuts that number of about a $17,000 increase in half. So how do we fund it? The revenue piece. Right now, we have ambulance revenue projected at about $2.3 million. This year, we're on track, and I don't have it in front of me, so give me 1 second. This year, we're projecting to hit about $2.6 million in ambulance revenue. Now, Gabe, why don't we have $2.6 million in there? We've got the first part of this fiscal year, we are still collecting prior years, and I shouldn't say prior year, but catch-up billing from when we made the transition from in-house billing to outsourced. So we had a few months of higher than normal ambulance revenue. We are still seeing an increase, and kind of when I back that out, the number's still a little higher than 2.3, but again, we don't have a lot of data on our ambulance billing yet with this new company. We've been with them for a little over a year. And so I'm still evaluating that number. I may revise it and bring it up a little bit more. But again, I want to be a bit conservative on our revenue that we don't have a lot of control over. And so, yes, Mr. McCarthy.
How far out do they chase these folks? As far as the people who owe, or insurance companies, or personal, ambulance fees and so on, how long do they go?
So typical billing company will really kind of collect for up to about 120 days, 150 days out.
And so they sell it off after that?
We do have a third-party collection agency that we then send those claims to afterwards, and they'll just keep going after them until we get nothing or they pay.
Okay.
Jim, I've got a question back on managerial expenses for you. Look at what you're projecting for managerial costs for this year. It's over $700,000.
Yes.
And right now you're budgeting at $694, and I'm just wondering, given what we're expecting to go up, why?
Yes, so a couple things. One, the 705 that we're projecting has that 2.6 million in ambulance revenue. So that ambulance collection, the percentage of collection is a component of that. The other big piece of that is we have about $100,000 in professional services in this year's numbers. that are related to the IT assessment.
All right.
So,
So we anticipate that there's not gonna be any expenditures on the IT assessment after, or in 2023?
we don't, not from, there may still be, but not from an operational budget funding. We'd be looking at that from a capital budget funding standpoint.
Yeah, as the board's aware, we are under a comprehensive IT infrastructure assessment, and there will be some significant cost with that, but we're not looking at any of that in this fiscal year budget because it will be capital. We'll look at it in capital, and just as a brief update, we structured a pretty specific RFP in terms of scope of work for this project. We're kind of in the middle of a pause, as our vendor became more intimately familiar with our infrastructure. They, based on their professional input, think we need to immediately address certain things.
Immediately what, I'm sorry?
Immediately address certain issues.
Okay.
Which I agree, and I suspected at some point they'd have sit down and let's talk, and they did. So, when I have them doing a, updated bid and report, I have them restructure it so we can address the most critical components. Again, I'm not our IT manager who's an expert, but we have a lot of legacy equipment out there, switches, repeaters, dishes, meaning it's old and there are not replacement parts. So when we have a failure with one of those, we have to put a brand new part in. So what the plan will be on that is get a report on here's all the legacy and the foundational things to our system that we need to address immediately. Immediately, it could be over a 2 to 3 year period. And once I get that, and have that prioritized, then I can structure a cost. Then we'll go into the capital and look at that. So again, remember, we're addressing things that haven't been looked at in decades, but it's gonna be a couple decades to crawl out of it. So I don't have any of that analysis or numbers for you yet, and it will come, but we'll be careful on the capital side to manage that. Again, my position will be over the next 1, 2, 3 years, let's get that foundational stuff addressed, so we can breathe a bit, and we don't have a major failure. Then we can structure 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan, and here's what it looks like over time with cost analysis. So that's my goal, to get that in motion in place, so it's kind of like buying a new house and you start paying a 30-year mortgage. We're gonna buy the new house, get it all programmed, and then we're gonna know what we need to do over that 30, 20-year period. It's alive in that area. That, as, I know we haven't talked about that in a couple months, but that's where we're at with it.
Well, I guess the question, though, that begs for me is, although you've got another $60,000 in professional fees, outside professional fees, given the fact that we are down IT people and we're relying on them for that, you're talking about an increase in professional fees to do what I would anticipate we would have an increase in professional. Much as I don't like to pump the budget up,
Yeah.
my question becomes, are we covered, or are we going to be in a position, we're going to be in a hole in this area where we've been in a hole this year?
Yes, we have bandwidth, and I don't, Dave, if you wanna talk in general that, but we do have bandwidth.
Yeah, I think my next slide, when I get to it, will address some of the bandwidth. But again, I do agree, we are gonna see more. We're trying to mitigate some of the impacts to the operating budget with all of those other increases that we've seen. And from a finance standpoint, we're looking at this IT infrastructure and the professional services and the more to the chief's side of it, and the study, not, regular maintenance is what we've increased the line item budgets for, as being a large capital project because of the dollar amounts that are kind of being thrown around, so.
I just think, because I don't think of, I admit to being new, but I don't think of professional services as being part of a capital budget.
Right. And I understand that, and it can be, given the fact that we're looking at what needs to be done to improve the capital within there. So it's essentially an associated cost with that versus, tell us what we need to do. It's more of a, this is what we're gonna do.
And the other comment I would have on that is, we have to create bandwidth. We've already talked about the challenges of this fiscal year. Where we can avoid a greater challenge, we're going to. So we do have some bandwidth on that capital side. I think it's structured better there based on the numbers we're looking at this fiscal year. And we'll decide how we structure it as we move forward, but, I'm not worried about the bandwidth on it yet. Am I worried about big numbers coming out of it? Yeah, but I gotta think in a 20-year perspective. Just different than, hey, by Monday, chief, we need this check. By Monday, what? I just start driving east till I end up on the East Coast. Right, so I agree with you, this is why I wanted to assess it, because I knew it was gonna be something that we had to really engage in a longer-term plan with a longer-term thought. But it's like anything too, the longer we wait, more failures we'll have, until one day we have a failure where it's like, yeah, we're just not gonna have radios for a month or so. And that's what I'm trying to get ahead of, even though I think in general, since we haven't addressed these as a district in a lot of years, we're a little behind, but we're better off than we were a year ago. I'll give you that one.
That's good to hear.
Okay.
In one way, the other thing to address kind of the question on what's capital versus not. I think one way to look at it too is in similar to your question, is facilities construction. Early on, when you're starting through some initial development phase and planning, you're gonna hire an architect. And a lot of those architectural fees are gonna be professional services that aren't gonna go towards the actual capitalization of that station or that facility. Once we move into a construction phase, from an accounting standpoint, we capitalize those architectural fees as the cost to construct. And so it's kind of a similar concept, if that helps.
Mhm.
Perfect. Got where I left off, ambulance, yeah. So, again, that's the 2.3 million is what's in the current proposed budget, but we're still working on hopefully refining that number and may have some bandwidth there. Communication rents, an increase of 3.75% based on our agreements for tower rental. Wildland revenue, we're holding at $500,000, and again, this doesn't affect our operating budget. So if we go on, and we bring in $1 million of wildland revenue and we have the associated expenses, we don't have that budgeting or balancing any of our line items. That's gonna help grow our capital fund balance, help improve our overall financial position. So if we don't see the $500,000, if for whatever reason, and if anybody, I don't know, stepped outside today, I don't think we're gonna have an issue with that, unfortunately. It won't impact the operating budget. We budget out, wildland wage, deployment wages, we budget out hard costs, and then if you actually look at page 4 of the draft budget, there, you'll see there's a $125,000 line item at the bottom, and that's our projected profit, so to speak, on wildland on that $500,000. Interest income, we're holding at $75,000, unfortunately, although, we have seen interest rates start to go up. I don't anticipating us seeing too much additional revenue from that standpoint. And the miscellaneous revenue increasing to $221,000, and that includes, our CRR revenue, some training revenue, donations, but we did increase that, by $50,000 for the Prop 207 monies. Again, taking a conservative approach, I'm hoping, we see more than that, but again, don't wanna bet, revenue on that we don't have a lot of experience with. And then the final component to this budget, is the property tax revenue, and that's the piece that's balancing out what's left. And, as we stand today, we're looking at a tax rate of $2.59, to fund the current draft, which is an 8.9% total increase in tax revenue, year over year.
What a jump, we went from 248,
We're at 248.8 now, yes.
259.
So about 11-cent increase. Under 11 cents.
Which is still good, because I think the projection 5 or 6 years ago for this time period was well into the $3 pluses.
Right.
So we're still in a pretty good position, although 11-cent jump is a pretty significant jump.
Right.
For what they're getting though, 11 cents isn't bad. I'm considering
Right.
everything that this district provides, everything.
In the tax year that this reflects, tax revenue is 2000 or 2001, or the actual monies from property taxes?
For next year, would be
Yeah.
based off of the 2022 assessment.
2022.
Correct.
Referencing Prop 1.
Oh, okay. You mean Prop 117?
Sorry.
Yeah. So where we were before, you know, with the growth in, assessed value,
Yes.
with the cap, yeah. I'd have to look at that, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Other questions for Gabe?
So. Sorry. So here's our, kind of the growth in our fund balance, and I went back to 17, I could have gone back further, but, the numbers didn't look very good back then. The bottom red represents our unrestricted fund balance. The darker red in the middle is our capital fund. Then you see in 2019, the creation of the end leave liability fund. And then finally, there's a $2 million, restricted, port fund. And then that line that goes across is GFOA recommended fund balance. And so, you know, as far as GFOA recommended fund balance, GFOA, you know, says for government agencies to look at a couple different factors. A lot of them is, you know, ability to raise funds, you know, volatility of revenues and expenses, and needs to draw on the fund for other purposes. And I actually have ours projected at only 20%. And the reason being, obviously, we have a very strong assessed value base. Even if, and I'm not saying, even if this proposed tax rate was adopted by you guys in June, we're still far off of that tax rate. So there's still a lot of, not only do we have a strong assessed value base, we still have a lot of capacity within the tax rate to levy additional taxes. And we have other funds in place, so we don't need to draw on our unrestricted fund balance to pay for capital or pay for unexpected retirement. And so that's why it's only set at about 20%. As you can see, looking back to 2017, we were well under, where we wanted to be. And then 2018 and 2019, once we established the capital fund, we didn't even have 20% in unrestricted fund balance. And then by 2020, we actually exceeded that minimum and continued to grow to 2021 and projected for 2022 year end. And so there's a couple things that we're looking at here is, one, increasing that end leave at the end of this year to $750,000, which is about 50% of our end leave liability. So we could have some pretty significant retirements occur and not have to touch our operating line item to be able to fund those payouts. Increasing the capital fund to $5.1 million, again, depending on some of these IT needs or in communication needs, we may need to address that some more. But as you can see, we still have $6.6 million in unrestricted fund balance, with that GFOA only being at $3.9 million for projected for the year. That gives us additional capacity of about a $2.6, $2.7 million. And so we have those funds also to then move over to address some of those infrastructure needs, if I shouldn't say if, but when they do arise. So again, these are those areas where this is our ability to not only weather what we're dealing with here and address some of the impacts and the assessments we're seeing this year, but also continue to look at some of the things down the road. And these are some of the things that, before we bring back that final draft, we're gonna look at as well and see what we can do, if anything, to help reduce the impact to this year's. So with that, I know there's been a lot of information. I appreciate everybody's time. I think I went a little bit over my 10 minutes. But happy to answer any questions, or any direction from the board.
Start out? I've got a couple. I've gone through it, as I stated earlier, as probably all of us have, and from a standpoint of being educated enough to make heads or tails out of all these numbers in here, I have a few items that I flagged. You can see the blue things here. And it's from a standpoint of when you add this and this, it should equal that, and it doesn't. And it's because perhaps I don't understand why. So, and I'll leave it at that, because, 1 plus 1 still equals 2 in my book, but today's math, you never know. But, what I'd like to do is sit down with the chief and or Gabe and literally go through some of these line items that I've identified that need an explanation as to why. In of themselves, they have but a small impact, but it's an impact nonetheless. And I'd like to invite maybe another board member to sit down so that we can sit down with the chief and go through those things that raise questions, so we have a better understanding, so that when we resume next month, presentation just isn't a presentation. It truly was a workshop from our point of view. And granted, we try not to get into the weeds too deep on some of these items, but we realize that each one of these things is important. And we're responsible to every community citizen out there for every dollar that we address. So, if we...
I'll volunteer.
Okay, so if we can,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
so if we can, perhaps the first 3 days of next week, we could schedule maybe a 4-hour window to sit down with you and go over through these things that we've identified and maybe input from the other board members. I say 2 only because 3 constitutes an open meeting, and then we got to be over here. So the 3 of us.
Yeah, so we'll have Tim schedule a meeting between the 2 of you, and I would like Gabe to be in there too, and probably Heidi.
Yeah.
That way I think we have enough staff there to adequately answer it. If we get to where we gotta refer to Ed or Dory or Jason, we'll make sure we get that information.
And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, to have more than 2 for this type of workshop would in fact create a quorum, correct?
Well, the rules actually prevent discussion amongst yourselves. All of you who are after board meeting, there's not a violation. The risk you run is if you get engaged in a conversation with staff, start chatting about things and dialogue between to show up and shut up and just hear instead of be heard. Don't see it that way. Because it automatically. I'll show up and listen to the chief.
Do we have the capacity to ask questions, but not discuss it amongst ourselves?
In theory, yes.
Theory.
You know, the short answer is yes. The long answer is I'd more often than I'd like.
So what about submitting the questions in advance for them to answer in that session?
Well, and I was gonna clarify, what your goal would be is some of those areas that you wanted, clarity, you would address them, right?
Correct. So, and again, the flags you see there on the first half of the document, and then I better ask a question first before I go any further, before I do the last 40 pages. But that's, I think it's needed, I think it's warranted, how we go about it. It may be in our best interest to have a true workshop, and we all show up here, it'd be an open meeting, and we sit and talk and go over these things, and for most people, it'll probably be boring as all get up, but it's important to us for what we're trying to accomplish here.
That's the recommended approach.
Right, so perhaps an emergency.
Special meeting?
Not emergency meeting, a special meeting next week, sometime during the first 3 days of the week, if your schedule allows for it. We'll discuss it afterwards, but perhaps more than just 2 board members would want to show up.
I would have to be there, for sure.
So there's some.
Yeah, we'll get that scheduled.
Okay, very good. Second item would be then for direction, is to continue working, towards our ultimate goal of coming up with a budget that is going to meet the needs of the district for the next fiscal year. Always with the mind and thought to, cut where we can, or if we need to beef up in those areas, for whatever reason, we need to look at that too. Of which I did see plenty of in here because of our last 2 years and the situation we've been in. So, that would be the direction. Continue, and we look forward to May meeting, where we'll have a much better sense of where we're at, because we'll have the tentative budget before us. All right, Gabe, thank you very much for your pre-budget or budgetary workshop presentation. Okay. With that said, we're going to get into our regular business meeting, but I'd like to take just 5 minutes to take a break before we get into that. We'll reconvene at 5:10. It's 5:06 right now, so 5 minutes, we'll get back together. Okay, again, thank you very much, Gabe, for the budget workshop presentation. We'll get on with our regular business meeting. Chief, do we have anybody from the public who would like to comment?
We do not.
Okay, very good. We do have a member from the public, and I don't know that, Al, if you'd like to introduce our guest?
Yeah, our guest is, Scott Springett, and, he is a, member of the community, lives in the Sedona Fire District, and he's, sitting in and watching the meeting today and the budget, to learn more about the fire district and how it operates. He is a 34-year retired fire captain from a district outside of, or a fire department outside of San Diego. So you're welcome, and thanks for coming and learning everything you can about.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, our consent agenda for this meeting is the March 15th, 2022 regular meeting minutes. And with that, I move to approve those in our consent agenda. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. Next up, our financial report for our April meeting of the March finances.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, you have the March financial report in your packet. Starting off, tax levy revenue for the month was at $489,000. We were under budget by $71,000, just more of a function of timing. You'll see year-to-date, we're actually kind of ahead of where we projected. We'll receive the largest portion of our second half taxes in the month of April, so I see that number grow kind of significantly. Non-levy revenue was at $340,000. We were $129,000 over budget for the month. Kind of following up with the budget presentation, a lot of what's driving that is ambulance revenue. So that's making up the majority of that positive variance on non-tax levy revenue. On the expenses, our total expenses are at $1,242,000 for the month of March. And you can see from the graph that we're actually under budget across all major expense categories for a total budget savings of $83,983 for the month of March. Really the biggest variance there was in communication. That's due to timing of our dispatch payment. Looking at year-to-date, we're at $15,478,000 in total revenue. That is over budget by $870,000. As I kind of mentioned, property tax collections at $12.4 million, which is $100,000 over where we projected to be at this point. But non-levy revenues are at 2.99 million, which is 760,000 over, where we projected to be. And again, ambulance, and wildland deployments are kind of the two major factors, that's driving that, revenue. Expenses are at 12,720,000. We are under budget by, 918,000. And again, similar to the month to the year, we are under budget, across all major expense categories. One of our more significant categories being, under personnel, and that's due to, basically some vacancies we've seen, within the district over this year. And so we have not only the wage savings, but the associated benefits cost savings as well. Next slide. As far as percentage of expenses, we're at 25% expended. Oh, it looks different today. I'm sorry, 75% expended with 25% remaining. And then, next slide. Our disbursement of our expenses, and this really ties into our budget discussion, as I mentioned kind of in the beginning, you know, we have the majority of our expenses are in our personnel, so we see costs go up there significantly impacts the entirety of the budget. So personnel is at 85% of our total expense. Operation makes up only about 7% of our expenses, and managerial and communication is only 4% of. And then finally, year over year, we ended the year with, the month with 14.3 million total cash on hand, compared to 12 million last year at the same time. You can see other assets actually held fairly flat, and a lot of that's not only we had investment in capital assets, but that's also a function of our annual depreciation on those assets that we do have in place. And total liabilities decreased slightly from 28.5 to 28. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Gabe on this? Okay. Thank you very much. We don't have any questions for you, so the motion to approve the March 2022 finance report as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any further discussion on that? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the financial report for March 2022 as presented has been approved. Thank you, Gabe.
Thank you.
Next up on the agenda is our fire chief's report. Chief Trotwine.
Chair, board. No, an incredibly linear person. I'm gonna go out of sequence here because we have our Assistant Chief Coyle is deployed in New Mexico on one of the two major fires there. So he's, should be with us. I wanna have him report out first so he can, get back on that fire line. Chief Coyle, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, good evening. I will go through my report and I will be happy to answer any questions. So the first item on my list is the COVID-19. Currently, there's no change in our protective posture, and I haven't seen any reason to anticipate a change. And some of those reasons would be a higher rate of community spread, more cases within the district, cases of spread within the station, or changes in the recommendations. And none of those have trended up, so I don't see any, I don't anticipate any reasons why we would be needing to trend up, at least between now and the next board meeting. Regarding significant events, the last month was, there's some significant backcountry rescues, and a couple times that the way it happens to occur that we would have two significant rescues at the same time. Crews did an excellent job on that. One of those, crews were 2 miles into West Fork. And they had another one, I believe, at Volte Arch, and they were able to manage both of those effectively. As I was looking through the Facebook notes for that particular call, one of the people that responded, one of the ladies that responded, said, "Are you guys in good shape? It seems like you would have to be." Yeah, they're in good shape. Those guys and gal do a wonderful job, and they absolutely would have to be. Take somebody across all those water crossings up West Fork in 2 miles, and then jump back in and go do another one. So the other things was MVAs. There's MVAs on the 525. Some involve UTVs, some involved regular vehicles, and then just MVAs through town. I think this is Jason's hypothesis, that there's a point where we get so congested that the MVAs don't seem to occur as often. And then there's that point where we're really busy, but the roads aren't so congested. And it seems to be that those are the times that we have more MVAs. Another highlight, well, I'm gonna leave that because I bet Ed's gonna talk about it, and it was more of a training, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But as far as responses continuing, on April 6th, there was a brush fire at Oak Creek Canyon that crews were able to keep small, and that is excellent because of the potential that exists across the Southwest right now. And I'll talk more about that in the wildland fire season update. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was, although the actual event occurred prior to the last board meeting, the recognition occurred this board meeting for crews that were recognized by NAH for saving the life of a man who suffered cardiac arrest on Highway 179. So all the crews involved got a nice little certificate from NAH and were recognized. So I thought that was really cool. And the last, and perhaps the coolest call in the last since the last board meeting, was on March 23rd. There was a dog that had become trapped in part of the seat mechanism in a car, and the crews were able to extricate the dog from that seat mechanism unharmed, and they happened to be able to do it on National Puppy Day. So I don't know what is a better way to highlight our skills than to save a trapped dog, puppy actually, on National Puppy Day. With that, I will move on into the wildland seasonal outlook. So there's a lot of theory out there about why fire seasons are bad and why and sometimes when they look like they're going to be bad, that they're not. And some of the reasons that occurs is that there are, some of the reasons we think that occurs at least is that there's incidents that, or there's conditions that long-term drought, things like that, where you get a lot of cumulative stress on the trees and they just become more and more likely to burn and to be resistant to suppression. Some of the other reasons is you just have a mild winter, but then you get a period of significant drying weather. And we've seen this in the Pacific Northwest before, where 1 month of significantly hotter than warmer and windier than warmer and drier than warmer weather will set off an epic fire season. We had a little bit below normal precipitation this year. It was a windier spring than normal, and it certainly is windy right now. Whatever the combination of reasons, the Southwest is in uncharted territory at this time. So right now, there's 3 Type 1 teams assigned to fires in Arizona and New Mexico. There is 2 more incidents that are likely to have at least a Type 2 team on them within the next 24 hours. The planning levels, which is an indication of how the level of resource commitment that we have. 1 is where we stay when things are mellow. We went to planning level 4 today. The highest is 5. We've never gone to planning level 4 this early in the fire season. So, whatever the things that are going on, it's in the Southwest, it's significant, and it's significant at higher elevations earlier than it has been in the past. There's a fire near Prescott that has a Type 1 team from California coming to manage it. There's a fire on the east side of Flagstaff that is at over 6,000 acres. And there's a new incident that just started in what's called Government Prairie, north of Parks, so west of Flagstaff, that crews are responding to as we speak. So we're ready as far as with Todd Miranda leading up the wildland program, Jordan Baker managing that component, and all the engine bosses and everything have stepped up to respond. And we have people that are working on additional training stuff to get qualified. All of our personnel are properly trained. They've all been Pact tested. And it's years like this when you wouldn't want to wait until now to get those qualifications and get those trainings, because it would be too late if you just recognize that there was a need. We did send an engine up on a rapid response for structures threatened to Flagstaff today, and they were on the road immediately. They left from the station to go up there. So that's the way we handle it when our neighbors have homes that are threatened, and that's, you know, the way that we hope all of our neighbors handle it when we end up in a situation where we have homes threatened. With that, I'll move on to the GIS updates. Some of the highlights were Emily was able to create maps of the area west of Bill Gray Road to show multiple different attributes to help us with understanding where our district boundaries are, you know, the appropriateness of them, and to kind of inform future decisions. She's also continues to update our new map books and work to have a better system to put our Forest Service gate codes in there. And so when they change, to be able to do that in a seamless manner. She's almost finished with the wilderness incursion survey, which the forest it'll make it easier for our folks to meet their statutory obligations for wilderness intrusions, and it will make it easier for the forest to be able to see, you know, what those wilderness incursions are, which, you know, we work collaboratively with them to make sure it met their needs, and they're very excited about what we're doing and talked about sharing it with other forests so they could, you know, they see it as a model, I guess what I'm trying to say. Field maps, Emily's currently working on releasing an edible copy of our TRT maps. And so why that's really cool is that there's social trails that emerge, whether they're from UTVs or from hikers or whatever, that aren't on the official trail maps, but people still get hurt on them. So we get a layer that has all the official trails on it, and that is useful, but having the ability to add these social trails as we come across them, as we're finding things, makes it where we can provide better service to the customer. And then finally, she's working with 911 with the Yavapai County Next Generation 911 group and the Psps on what they call emergency services zone boundaries. So it's all just part of a larger system of requirements for this next gen 911 that makes it where we can more seamlessly respond to calls and make sure that they don't end up the wrong people don't get called for a call that leads to a delay in service, which could have consequence for the customer. Finally, moving on to telecom updates, you know, with Bob facilitated getting some demo phones installed at Station 1 for evaluation. Everything I've heard from the evaluation so far is that they were very well received. But that's been something that's been in the capital plan for a couple of years, and they're certainly end of life. They're not serviceable anymore, and we're kind of flying one mistake high with failure. So we hope to accelerate getting those replacements accomplished in the very near future, so that we make sure that we have the functionality we need to do our job. And what I think was, I don't say unique about this process, but critical to the success of this process is after we define the technological requirements for the system, we'll be able to back it up, being able to make it work with our servers, all that. Then the selection came down to what the end users needed, which in my mind is the way these things should work. Whether it's IT or anybody else, we shouldn't make decisions about end user, what they get that they have to use every day with their job, because we think it's the best thing. We should set requirements that we need and provide them for an opportunity to provide input to ensure that it does the best job of meeting their needs, because they're the ones that use it every day. We had multiple network switches go bad at Station 3, at Station 4, and router interfaces. That they resulted in 8 call outs. Bob actually had to cancel some BLs since he's, one-man emergency shop right now, and network items dropping offline. So different parts of our network dropping offline. He was able to correct all those, didn't have any impact to our service, but I think it just points to the need to address some of the issues the chief spoke to earlier. Finally, on the telecom, there's a lot more to go over, but the last thing I wanted to highlight was the meetings with Pegasus continue to go forward, and we continue to work to make sure that we are providing them with the information that they need so they can provide us with the best holistic assessment. And actually, there's one more thing. I've quite the list from Bob every time, and I kind of pare it down out of the interest of time, but two items that both relate to the same sort of problem and situation that we're in right now. One is that the lead time for components that we need for our system right now is about 9 months. And he continues to look for other alternatives to get those more quickly, but it's just difficult to source them. And a issue that emphasized that is that trying to put radios in a new command vehicle, he had to prep radios, look for the spare parts that he had around, and basically build the radios because they're still on order and have been on for some time and not received from the manufacturer of the radios. So with that, that is the end of my board update as far as the chief's report goes. And I would be happy to entertain any questions the board may have.
Report. Chief, real quick, our team that went up to Flagstaff, how long is this deployment for?
So when we send them out in this rapid response fashion, we'll stay on the incident as long as the incident demands require it. What we will do is if personnel aren't able to stay, past their normal shift, then we'll swap them out. So I'm not certain how long that they're going to be up there, but that's the way that we handle it, just to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the incident. And we do have, so it doesn't sound as terrible as like we just set them on the road. And, everybody has 21-day packs that are issued to them. We have sleeping bags and gear and everything in the stations for that. And while we do send people immediately, we also make sure that we pick people that are seasoned professionals when it comes to the wildland. Everybody has to have minimum qualifications, but there's some people that you feel a lot better about when they're out in front of a going fire trying to protect homes when there's 50-mile-an-hour winds. And so we made sure that those were the personnel that were sent up there.
Very good. Thank you. Chief?
Thank you. Take care.
Be safe out
You
there.
bet. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we'll digress now. Go back to the top of the chief's report. Get me back in my linear mode. So when we look at our 22 monthly incident summary, you can see our incident total to date last year was 1,078, this year 1,107. So we're trending looking normal. And then the March trend, you can see we're up quite a few calls. Again, that's consistent with travelers in town over spring break, and I think we all saw them. And there's our totals on responses in Pursuit District, and how we support and encourage each other. So with that, let's move to Director Robinson for administration.
All right, thank you. So to kind of give you a quick update on some events that we did, we're coming out of our COVID restrictions and we're able to participate in a few more things. So we hope to see those news and events pieces pick up a little bit and be a little bit more interesting. So the photo that is displayed there is actually from the first item on there, which is the Special Olympics Torch Run. It is a police department event that they do annually and that we actively and willingly participate in. Chief Lukowski, who usually spearheads this event for the district, getting it on the calendar, making sure people know that it's happening, making sure that we're aware and geared up. So you can see that they wear special shirts and just kind of encourage and help along that route is something that's a good community builder, and it's a good partnership between first responding agencies. The chief just mentioned them with our numbers up in the spring break visitors. It also impacted our social media. So we saw that the posts that we did that showed the visitors to our community, rescues, the number of cars on the streets and parking lots, got the most hits that we did this month from our social media. And it all related around that big tourism impact to Sedona during spring break. We had great weather and great amount of visitors, which we serve as well as our community, and we're happy to have them. Can create some issues, and we work through those. So that's how it works out there. We've talked about strategic plan updates. So we had our kind of calendar through. We did our training. We got our updates in, and most of us were able to get our updates in. And so you'll see later on when the fire chief reports out on that strategic plan update that we've got a visual for you, so you can kind of see that first go of us all getting in and starting to go in. Hey, where have we been when we haven't been putting it into the software, but the work has been done, and getting that in. It's a little tight doing it with the meeting right on top of when the due date was, so we're going to make sure we do a little bit of a shift so that when we're doing a quarterly update for you, that it's coming the month after the due dates are in, so that everybody can get their stuff in and we can get you a good graphic, good live look at it. So just kind of giving you in those Recruitment updates, we have several positions that are out there. So we have our 3 positions for IT. We've got the 2 radio tech positions, and then the user, what was that? Technician. So we've gotten a number of hits on that, so number of qualified applicants, and that, the review period is not through yet, so that's coming up towards the end of April will be our first review. We posted them all as open until filled because we don't intend to have that false deadline of when we need to have something so that we can complete a process rather than starting over. We just want it to be. So HR does that original or that opening review, those, make sure that they meet the minimum qualifications. We have it posted on some technical sites, on some veteran sites, so we have that as well, trying to do those pieces. Also a skill set for our veterans that we think that we might be able to tap in if we're making sure we're advertising in the right places. As well as that, we have opened up our firefighters, our annual firefighter recruitment. So we want to make sure we always have an active current list, so we do this annually. So that is out there, and we've made a commitment this year to really go into some minority recruitment. So Human Resources has reached out to a lot of our firefighter organizations that service women, that serve minorities, and that are focused on that to make sure we're advertising with them specifically so that they know that Sedona is hiring and looking for applicants of a good, diverse nature. So we're getting some questions, we're getting requests for right along the training, and so we're excited about this process coming. So upcoming, we've been talking about our wellness and things that we can do to make sure that we're staying healthy and staying ahead of injuries and doing that. So we've talked about pieces of screening, our annual fitness test, the Pact Test, wellness exams. And then the next component is we do it internally, is a functional movement screening. So rather than looking at strength and power and the things that you could do, it's your range of motion, it's your flexibility, and those things that are the ones that are going to get you, stepping off a curb and looking the wrong direction or reaching for tissues in the back seat. You're more likely to strain yourself this way. So it's these motions that'll get you because you're not looking at it, and are you building the right structure to do it? So they created a baseline for it several years ago, and do it annually if they can, of updating it just to see where you are, and it's a scale of where you are in your functional movement. So it's when you're stepping over an impediment on the ground, it's reaching, it's balance. And they open up this opportunity to the administrative staff as well. So led by Chief Baker, and then also really helped out by Captain Tarver around, and they do that. So they'll be doing us our functional movement screening coming up this, I think this next month. So we're looking forward to that. We have a meeting in the books for the annual award celebration. So we've got the awards committee getting together so that we can meet and discuss what kind of an event we want to have and when we will have it. With fire season starting immediately, we may be bumping it to the fall, but we're not canceling it, we're not avoiding it, we want to have it, but we're looking at right now, it might be hard to gather together our group as we head right into the summer and wildland season. So we'll get that planning, we'll make sure that the board is well aware so that we can get that availability and make sure that you all can join us in celebrating our staff. I put on here the Verde Valley Fair, and maybe say, why are we putting the Verde Valley Fair? Sedona Fire isn't necessarily participating in this in any way as an organization or as a group, but we have a number of personnel who have children, nieces, nephews, who have livestock in this event, and we have a number of staff members who are going to take a day or two off, who need to get there and help their kids. A robust 4-H program in this community, in the valley as a whole. And Sedona Fire, our Sedona residents, the local business people regularly participate in that and fund these programs and fund our youth. The Missoula children are great entrepreneurs in this venture, and our payroll specialist, her nephews as well. And so we wanted to highlight that because it's just a great community.
If I may, P.T. Baker's son was, grand champion last year with, swine, so.
Dates, locations.
The 28th, 29th, and 30th, I'll get you the specifics on the schedule.
So those the last days of the month of April, okay? So, good times, lots of fun, so we do that. So I'll finish off my presentation with our mental health moment, and, hey, it's budget season, so we'll just call it out like it is, it's Stress Awareness Month. So here we are, right in the middle of it, with, compounding pressures. And so, just looking at those pieces of, we try to bring it to mind so that there's mindfulness about it. And what can you do to alleviate your stress? So we try to provide those resources here at Sedona Fire through our EAP program, which we talked about with our benefits, trying to do these things in a way that's functional movement screening, doing our training, daily training, making sure that we have access to health and fitness, that we open up not only to the personnel as it's needed for them to stay fit and qualified, but our administrative staff to see that there's a health component to our life as well, and making sure that we have those resources available. All of that, the mind, body with the stress, is making sure that stress is not bad inherently. It's how we manage it and how we live with it and how we cope with it. So making sure that we've got the tools available, that we support each other, so that when somebody is in a stress moment, that we can recognize that. We have a lot of our personnel are caregivers as well as living and navigating their own life. So that compounded with an urgency to get work done, to feel like you should be doing more in your community, that you want to get active again as we get a little bit of a release from our restrictions for COVID. It can be stressful and in ways that you don't consider it. So want to be mindful, take care of your neighbors and your friends. And with that, if you have any questions or comments.
Your presentation covered a lot of ground.
All right, thank you very much. Oh,
Hold on, Mike, I have a
I'm holding.
question.
Oh, sure, sir.
Can we get an update on where we're at with our new website development? This wasn't on the report, and we've had a couple really good meetings on that. I'm really excited about it. So I was gonna say something, but I'd rather Heidi would, because
Excellent, I'd be happy to.
articulate it better.
I did not put it on the report because we had not yet had the actual planning meeting. We did need to delay it, and I didn't know if I'd have anything to report. So we had put in, way back in the 2020 surplus budget funds, we had put in a request for us to update our website. So we have a website that is not very, it has a lot of information and functional, but it's not easily navigable, and it's not easy to update. And so we would like to correct for that, for obvious reasons, mostly so we get information out and modernize it, make it clean. And it has been a burden on the IT department. It's fallen under their purview and unnecessarily so. So we've contracted out. The chief and I had gotten together. We put out bids and requests for information, narrowed down our candidates, and then we selected a firm. We had our kickoff meeting just this morning after some dialogue back and forth, that we're just kind of in an information building phase. So asking some questions about websites we like, websites we don't, who the community we serve, what kind of information we want to make sure is out there. I sent out a survey to board member McNeil, and she responded graciously with a lot of really great ideas. We're going to wrap her into that process as we continue through. She's roped in now. And to continue to get feedback, we got some excellent feedback from Chief Booth as well, as our PIO. What kind of things do we want to put out there, and how are we going to get information to our community members so that we know that we can share information from our neighboring agencies. And we want it just to be clean and navigable, make it so that we can put updates up there, and then make room where we can make special announcements, and we can put things that are, I'm using special a lot, that we can highlight different features so that we're able to personalize our department, but truly be informative at the same time. And as our goals, we want safe, friendly, dedicated to be out there. So we'll continue that process. It's going to be about an 8-week process. Just kicked off today. The next 2 weeks, we'll build that information for them to kind of get a blueprint for the site, and then we'll have more each month as we go along.
Very good, thank you. Thank you.
Yep, thanks for that on the spot, because we did have that meeting this morning, but I'm excited about it. I think it's gonna be a significant improvement, and I think there's gonna be ability to us, or to to the community to access information more accurately, more quickly. And the other, a parallel in that, we mentioned it earlier, Chief called it on the IT, is that phone system, getting that replaced. And I recently went down to Big Park for a committee there that's working on their emergency preparedness, and fortunately, I said to them, hey, you know, one of the things we're doing is updating and improving our phone system, which one of the ladies was like, I was gonna, you know, tell you that I'm concerned about your phone system, so I got it out first. But this kind of aligns with just trying to get that information to the community and to the travelers more readily and more user-friendly and functional. So I'm personally excited about it, so. Let's go to, CRR, Division Chief.
All right.
Change it up a little bit. I'm a graph person. I like colors and numbers too, so tried to incorporate those together. March was a busy month for us, and I haven't seen it slow down yet. So our code consultations, which encompass anything from architects, engineers, homeowners, new contractors in the area, have March, and we're doing Firewise consultations. They went down this in March. However, we've already probably done plan reviews, those did go down a little bit. Not that's because plans are going down. I was out for that's a good thing on CRR inspections are up 15%, so plans and permits are in place, and construction is continuing on here, both in residential and a lot of commercial, especially remodels, renovations, and then more and more city-based projects. Parking garage is coming up, that we're part of that team, as well as some code enforcement. Engine company inspections. During March, we were still under quite a reduce our exposures for our crews. Was in March, we'll get as long as we've got to do it. Special events, we had two, the half marathon. What it is, but we are starting to be more actively engaged in those across both counties as well as the city. Investigations in March, we had two. Compliance engine, which is our tracking, we had 148 system reports this month, which is up about 40%. You see those grow as buildings become remodeled. They're required to come up to date with current adding systems, fire alarms. That's continuing to grow as well. Animal events, to attend the Wildfire Academy down in Prescott, Investigator 2 training. Also coordinated with the National Forest and did a fire investigation for a few people that we hosted. The other thing that we're starting to do, as we talked a little about with the budget, is initiating the transition into 2018 International Fire Code. Because the fire code has continued to grow over the years, and we're still in 2012, we've got years, which means we've got cycles of code to get caught up with. I anticipate this being as a phased approach. Most likely, the first would be Chapter 1, which is the administrative chapter, which includes that push through into the fiscal year. Also, that way everything kind of coincides with each other. That'll be a huge asset to us that really lines out adjusting the fees online with what the state and other districts across the state as well help us kind of cost recover what we're doing. I know based on our workload now, in the future, so we are growing and we are busy. Safety message. Normally we do a safety message, but it's both. Right now we've got over 4 named fire events in the state. The tunnel fire in less than 24 hours has gotten over 6,000 square acres. Yeah, 6,000 acres. With evacuation, the Crooks fire continues to grow in Prescott. So this weekend we're actually starting our 19th annual Firewise weekend cleanup. The first time in a very long time, we're gonna be in the village of Oak Creek on April 23rd and 24th, right behind, shopping center there. So that is gonna be from 8 to 5, both Saturday and Sunday, where residents of the district can bring yard waste, not cactus clippings, not trash, but anything from their yards to help continue, make them fire-wise, get some more, buffers between their homes. And next one is gonna be April 30th and May 1st in Uptown Sedona, right in the parking lot by Station 4. We actually have, the city is gonna be helping us with that. They're lending tractor for a day for wood chipping. Partner with more of our, agencies that are also working and one big thing is creating the defensible space at least 30 feet away from your home, getting things that are non-combustible. That doesn't mean to make it, you don't have to clear cut it, you don't have to scrape everything away, but finding those high moisture content plants, getting rid of debris, cleaning out your eaves and your gutters, because even though not everybody's in the wildland urban interface, over 70% of our district, that leaves 30%, and it's really kind of in the middle where embers can fly. You see our winds and what they're doing now, and the fires that are growing at rapid speed. So, sure, even if you don't think fire can happen to you, it's getting fires cleaned up. So, have one, embers don't care for internal fires.
Not a question, just a comment with regard to Firewise. For those of us who have committed to our property to clean them up with heavy, but you know, the problem for many of us is our neighbors, and it's difficult to handle them. Of course, there's the direct approach, where you go knock on the door and so forth, but that doesn't always work, and I can attest to that. Where on surrounding areas, there's enough brush to communicate quite well to my area around my place is clean. I clean under the trees, everything, but not too far away. Depends on the direction of the wind, and that changes every day. One's from the north, sometimes it's from the south, and so I don't know what to do about it. And for me, and I'm sure some of the people around here, their neighbors may be of concern. You got any suggestions?
You know, public relations outreach, so that it bypasses you and knocks on the door and finds people.
You see, I have taken the responsibility of being the neighborhood watch guy. I have a directory of everybody within a mile all the way around, sometimes, in one case, 2 miles. I know who lives there, I know their family, I have contacts, I know what kind of equipment they have, and so on and so forth. And I've sent out Firewise information to all of those residents. So, you know, but lead the horse to water.
So, and one of the things that we do, we get a lot of concerned citizens calling in neighbors or things that they drive by, both commercial and residential. An option that we have explored and is the best route, you know, is obviously the cover neighbors that don't want to do it, or, you know, don't know how, or the resources. We've been working with the counties. A lot of times these are blight violations. I don't want to say it's easier, but it's more appropriate when it comes to residential properties to go through a residential code enforcement than the fire code enforcement based on regulations throughout the district, the counties, and the state. That being said, you know, especially when we're really close to the wildland urban interface, communicate with the state fire marshal, we can communicate with the forest, and in some instances, there are assets and grants that are available that come up that we can. Those are kind of past this date, but that is something that we're also looking for in the future. The grant will pay X amount of dollars if you pay in, have more funds available for Firewise communities. So if you've got HOAs and you can connect to help that direction, and I know the fire marshal's office has.
I know where I came from, several years ago, if a neighbor had an adjoining lot that they own next to their property, they were sent a notice. And if they didn't comply, the city came in and cut all the weeds down and attached it to their tax bill.
And that leads to a unique enforcement challenge that we have within the district. Go through. And that's another avenue, is like you said, you were in a municipality where the city would come in and attach it to their tax code, where right now, that's why enforcement and action is not done often, nor there's to zoning does it.
Just a question. An individual can request sort of a review of their property before they get suggestions and ideas on how to make the property more fire safe, fire-wise, for their own initiative. We don't go knocking on the doors and give people well, you should do this and this and that. It's up to them to take the initiative. Is that
Correct. So if somebody requires it, but we have made a couple push on social media, letting them know fire-wise assessments, but it's important to understand that we get a lot of confusion from people also that think that we, the fire department, is going to say this house isn't going to burn. Very inaccurate. But we do go out and educate based on the NFPA fire-wise program of, defense and.
I used to live in a neighborhood here in West Sedona that was so heavily treed with pine trees, with pine needles everywhere, on the ground, on the roof, that almost no sunlight hit the ground. It was amazing. And I used to think, boy, that is just a tinderbox waiting to go. And, 'cause the dry, dead pine needles were walk on the ground and it crunched, and I've often wondered, do people really think how real fire will grow once you drop a cigarette there? That would be
education piece, and that's part of my goal with some of the upcoming budget costs from community risk reduction is more current announcements, handouts, which this last year, the Arizona Burn Foundation actually created a children's program with Milo and Moxie regarding wildland fire, so we ordered 1,000 of those kits, so we can start taking those to schools, as well as special events as we start talking about in the community. An app that goes along with it that
I've got a quick question for you. With the adoption of this code, the Outland code that we just recently adopted, one blank that's been overlooked perhaps was that line that says, and you'll be involved with it, I guess, with the administrative chapters as you get involved with this 2018 code, is the level at which a violation occurs. Is it constitute a certain level of crime and a dollar figure that goes along with that? Is that something that you're going to be looking to address as we get into these codes?
absolutely. 18 wildland urban interface, those actually filled in. But the base code, the main code, the International Fire Code in the 2012 was not filled in. And that's something that we've actually found consistent across the board in most districts is that paragraph, and a couple of the other referencing paragraphs have not been filled in. A lot of that has to do with the enforcement entity. Where it comes in with districts, it's the county. So for Sedona, we're in a unique system. We have Coconino County and Yavapai County, and then we also do the fire code enforcement. So, depending on how that looks. So I've been working with Mr. Whittington's team as well as the fire marshal's office to statutes on what fire code violations can do, because they can be civil. And, depending on the, recidivism, where the person just hit and then lives on tomorrow and come back a year later and it's back, or is it just something that's completely. I work very closely with Mr. Whittington and his team, getting that firmed up for this chapter 1, but
that kind of ties into Mr. Whittington's communications with city attorneys back. It's been an ongoing process, still still ongoing, I would imagine, as far as code enforcement, code interpretation, still ongoing. So we haven't heard anything in a while.
Lori's done a nice job.
Look forward to seeing some sort of input on that or receiving input from that. Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks, Chief. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Let's, go to Division Chief Azulis for operational support.
Oh, yeah, that's easy to read. I had my physical last week and I've gotten to the point where I may need some vision. But, I'll start with a tag on to Dory's, our Chief Booth, report. She didn't mention that, the wildfire investigation training that evening was followed up with a wildfire investigation by her division, so it was timely. The day we had the wildland fire in the canyon they were getting out of class, so it was great. Ems Activities and Updates. We had 3 of our ambulances inspected since the last board meeting, by DHS. They're required to be inspected annually, to certify them for use. And pretty cool, because the state's inspector, he just comes in our stations with a smile, and he does a thorough job, but he doesn't come in with expectations there's going to be issues. And he's mentioned it to me multiple times that our guys really keep up on our equipment, and our stuff's in great shape. And that, that's due to our guys taking care of it, our gals, and to you guys supporting, our capital and fleet schedule. So it's just nice to hear somebody from the outside come in and say everything's looking great. We've also been working with our medical director and our pre-hospital coordinators. Certain areas of our operation, it's been more difficult than others to knock the dust off, and that's particular to our hospital and our medical partners, because the nature of COVID was it's a pandemic, and that involves healthcare providers. And I'm excited that our medical director and our pre-hospital coordinators are ready to hit the ground running and get back to what we do, and that's in-person training, and that's a thoughtful approach to reaching out to the public, and we're working on a few things that align with the strategic plan to make that happen. And I believe from an EMS standpoint, we'll enhance some of our public outreach. So I'm excited to report on that in the next couple of months. And our doc is also, he's pretty savvy with technology, and he's offered up monthly come if you can meetings where he picks a topic of importance, and our crews can jump in and get good continuing education on the fly and interact with our physicians. So that's good. Other than that, as you saw in the call report, we're continuing to run calls and take care of the public and our visitors. Fleet-wise, Mike continues to work on his continuing education, and for our mechanic, there's 2 tracks. There's emergency vehicle technician courses, and there's our automotive service organization trainings, and we're trying to keep those up and keep up abreast of all the current technologies and the new technologies on our apparatus so he can properly maintain them. And he's always looking for manufacturer-specific training for our apparatus. And it helps that we're like-sizing our fleet. All of our ambulances are Ford chassis. All of our chief vehicles or Fords, and then, you know, we're working towards a single manufacturer for type 1 apparatus, which is the big fire truck that runs the streets. And so, he's just been booking and cooking. We evaluated and utilized a new fleet vendor, this last month, and, they did a really good job. They had the vehicle for a couple of weeks, worked through some problems that was warranty work for Mike, and, it was neat because they do weekly updates, and then they have a lot of little French benefits. They've got, if you're strapped for staffing, for example, they're down in Mesa, but they'll accommodate meeting us halfway, so, you know, we get the vehicle back quicker. Just some little benefits, and got a lot of really good feedback, from using them, and then I think it's a great opportunity for us to have another vendor if we have some higher level or more labor intensive, work to get done, that we have more than one option, because the other option we have is in Tolleson, and they are busy. They are the Cummings product line repair shop, and they, you know, from school buses to everything else, and so we get in line when we get in line. Because it's red doesn't mean we get priority, so to have some options is a really good deal, and Mike really worked on facilitating that, so that was good. And speaking to Chief Coyle's point, I just wanna again thank Bob Motes. We ordered the radios for the new command vehicle build in November, and, he part and parceled some radios together so we can get that truck in service, because the lights finally arrived, so it's getting built out right now, but, if not, we would have had a completed truck ready to go into service, missing radios for 9 months. So Bob did a great job. And I don't know, there's so many things I can't explain. I don't understand how it works, but it's shocking to me. We'll get into training. We have a ton of folks go to the Arizona Wildfire Academy. We have some folks that teach there, and get a lot of feedback from the folks that run the academy that, you know, our guys are always professional, do a great job. And, you know, we completed all of our wildland refresher stuff this past month, which includes one of our firefighters putting on a refresher, talking about some of the safety aspects of firefighting and going over some of the wildland stuff. And then all of our crews, if you don't know, do a Pact Test. And that's, we go to the high school, we do 3 miles with 45 pounds, and it has to be done in 45 minutes. And you can't run, you have to walk. So it's an interesting walk to keep that pace. But all of our folks have completed it, so it's good, and just in time, because we've jumped right into wildland season. Also in training, as you can see, you know, the NFPA classes have been attended. Our technical rescue team and the instructors have been going nuts. They've been getting our annual swiftwater refresher done. They've been doing our new hire ropes courses, our rope refresher courses, and working with DPS for our guys that hang below. And DPS uses our tower to help with some of their recertification training. So it's a great reciprocal relationship. And then we also hooked up with DPS out at the sewer treatment plant and helped them recertify their bird. And what that means is they have to configure for the DPS helicopter has 3 main functions. They have a law enforcement function where they help with search and rescue and felony searches and things like that. Then they can configure to do medical missions where they have a paramedic on board. And then their third mission is they have a hook where they can connect the bucket to it and pull water and help us with wildfire. Well, they're required to recertify their ship every year. And with the tank out at the sewer treatment plant, it's a great spot. And, you know, it's not a heavy lift for us to send folks down there to help them out. It gives us an opportunity to set up some of our equipment and recertify, but then they also let our personnel call in the drops. You know, we'll pick a spot and call in where they want the water drop, and it's one of those skills for some of our guys moving up the food chain that you have to do in a real life. You can't talk it through. You have to physically have an aircraft there and direct the drop to get signed off on that particular thing, and you don't always have that opportunity on a working fire. So it's a great opportunity, and then again, another partnership we have established. And so we've just been busy all over the place, and folks are doing a great job. And that's what I got. So, questions or comments?
I've got a question for you. Admin's report referred to vacancies of firefighters and IT, I believe. And mentioned a vendor down south that we could meet halfway and cut time down. I don't recall in this budget if it still allocates funding for that second position that didn't mention yet, for the mechanic. Where are we with that?
We're evaluating a couple options. One of the options we're looking at, and we're working on some job descriptions and looking at comparable districts, is what I've dubbed a fleet and facilities maintenance technician. And the vision is, looking at some other fire districts, comparable districts around the state, it's not unusual for them to have somebody committed to the facilities maintenance. And as we have alluded to earlier, finding contractors to do part and parcel work is becoming more and more difficult. And speaking with Mike and working with our mechanic on what help looks like to him, it's part and parcel. And what he's indicated is, with working with the chief, I think somebody that's more of a technician level to try out a position like that, somebody who could go into the shop on Monday morning and say, Mike, what do we got this week? Okay, I'm doing the brakes on engine 511 on Tuesday, I'm gonna need a second set of hands. And then on Wednesday, I need to get a ride to Phoenix to pick up a truck. And then from there, they'd have a help desk ticket, hey, there's a leaky sink at Station 4, there's a stucco crack in Station 3, there's something going on, there would be added benefit. And right now, we're landing on the potential of it being a part-time spot right now, and the chief can speak to it in further detail, but we're working on a job description, trying to develop something that would work for our district, meet the needs of our district, and be appropriate. And so that is moving forward, looking at those different opportunities.
Chief, any comment on that?
Probably did cover it. Yeah. And again, a lot of the efficiencies we built in, using outside vendors, getting more efficient ones, like Ed's gained out. Also, the utility truck, again, we purchased last year, where he can be mobile, and keep very, efficient in that way. So, we're trying to trim his time down. Also, remember when we restructured and did the EMS billing outsourcing, we were able to take one of the personnel and make them an administrative specialist under operational support, but they could start taking some of the administrative duties that the mechanic would have to do. And then, again, it frees him more hands-on time, less time on a computer, less time on the road, trying to move a rig. So, I think, managing the budget, looking at the position, looking at how many heavy, vehicles we have, and the different type of apparatus we have, lighter vehicles being outsourced. Like, I'm gonna go over to Big O and get my truck serviced tomorrow morning. So, it's a combination of all those factors, and I think, looking at that part-time position, we've, Chief Azul's done a pretty good job of structuring out that job description. So, we'll fly it and see if we have anybody around the valley that would be, based on the current contractors, people available in the job market.
So then, basically on what you're saying is that we are gonna fund in part a second position for fleet services?
Yeah, it would be a combination, not just supporting fleet services, but it would support facilities too. So, in other words,
I'm trying to nail down, are we gonna eliminate a position under Mike or for Mike, or are we going to combine a position with multiple?
yeah, that position transitioned out 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it? That position, the two positions transitioned out 4 or 5 years ago to one position.
Nope, okay, forsaken.
Well, at least before I was here, I've been here 3, so. I don't know, Ed, do you remember or want to comment on that, other position?
I believe Chief Casey modified, I believe it was 2016, modified the job descriptions and change the staffing in the shop. I'll get a correct answer.
Because, I mean, my concern obviously is with a single mechanic, a legitimate mechanic, that is entitled to vacation, is entitled to his sick time off, is entitled to, if he gets hurt, we have not a backup, not a second mechanic, not a outsourced
Well, there's
daily activity. That's what concerns me.
another concurrent evaluation is, Northern Arizona Diesel, and I think I'm misrepresenting the name, but there was a company in Flag that closed its doors, and, Chief Keller at Copper Canyon hired a mechanic. So, this just happened within the last few weeks, and so, there's conversations being had on, you know, hey, a back scratch moment, and, but understandably, you know, he's got his budget process going on, and in addition to that, he doesn't know what the workload or the capacity of the person he hires is gonna be, so that will have a delay to it, but in respect to shared services, I don't think an opportunity has been rolled out to potentially work together.
Right, I think that, yeah.
Yeah, so, first of all, just to address your concerns, which I appreciate, and we are addressing those concerns. And actually, I don't believe the analytics show that 2 full positions are warranted based on the workload.
Okay.
So that's one component. You know, we have to have enough workload for 2 full positions. You know, and your concern about one person doing one thing, I've got that across the board in admin. I got 1 payroll specialist, I got 1 HR analyst. Board's approving me to go a little deeper in the bench. I'm in. You know, and again, so how do we manage that? First of all, like the HR specialist, payroll specialist, our mechanic, they become very good, at what they're doing in our fire district, and they become incredibly valuable. But we manage the vacation for all of them, or sick time, or if someone gets injured. And sometimes that takes a little shift and flexibility with the staff, stepping up a little bit, and like with the mechanic, I think we've managed very well the last 3 years with the 1 position. I think, the vacation, sick's been managed quite effectively. I think, Chief Mazul's good at looking at getting ahead of that, and that's why we're always looking for, especially with the heavies that are more specialized, you know, I mean, I can take my pickup truck over to Big O, over to Sedona Oil and Lube, and we can get service on it, we can get brakes, whatever. For those heavies that our mechanic becomes a specialist on, he knows our rigs, he knows how to service them. We're always looking for vendors to outsource, because that's the backup. Just like with some of the other admin positions, it's other staff stepping up. Again, so I think right now, if we could find, that part-time person that can support, that makes it even easier to accomplish those, or to back him up and accomplish those concerns. You know, I mean, I have some of the same concerns with some of our positions, where if I got and in this job market, there's a lot of work out there. And there's a lot of work that's competitive, wages, benefits, working conditions, you know, remote working. I'm trying to compete with everybody else to keep some of those one-ups, you know, and so it's not unrealistic. You know, vacation, sick, managing one-time outsourcing a mechanic is one thing, but having our mechanic plucked by somebody else because he's highly qualified, but they give him a better offer. You know, we're talking like, you know, Major League Sports, where everybody's willing and dealing out there. So that's even a greater concern for me. So I think, you know, we have to have a holistic approach. We have to realize we're kind of at that breaking point of the fire district where, you know, we're like that medium-sized organization where there's some areas where there's only 1 of us. And this is a good example of way. You get to the larger organizations, you have way deeper depth on your bench. You get to the small organizations, you know, there's 1 guy doing 3 of those. So we're right in that middle, which is a breaking point, so you gotta manage the fiduciary part of it, the budget part of it, and make sure that we're hitting every stroke, and then what do you do on the backup? So I think we've been managing very well, you know, and, I think that's a testament to Mike, that's a testament to Chief Mazul.
Mike.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I fully appreciate the management you guys have done with all those skilled positions, whether it's IT, fleet services. It's a juggling game every single day, and you guys have been doing a great job. But it's also important to know that for those members that we do show concern of and for, to make sure that, you know, they don't get forgotten, they don't become forgotten, and, through this whole budgetary process. So, yeah, that's great to hear that we're working on plans, and it reassures us that we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I appreciate the not forgotten things. We analyze, we look at the budget. You know, a few months back, we, updated some job descriptions. And there wasn't an alignment there with looking at the wage scales also. And that was what I think, I appreciate Chief Mazulis' game in the South, looking at that part-time position, but also looked at our mechanic and qualifications and said, well, you know, let's do a wage study here and make sure we're paying them what it's due. So that is one position too. As we go into the budget and see the wage scale, we're gonna make some adjustments. And I think it's warranted too, and there was some analytics and some, you know, evaluating that, but it's under that whole theme of, hey, everybody here is valuable. Not just the one-ups, but everybody's valuable. So that's important to us too, when we look at wage and benefits and get it into the market, keep our people there.
Thank you. You have a question?
Where I came from, city, school district, mechanic. I don't know how, that's where we took our.
Yeah, and
Anything like that?
that's a good, yeah, it's interesting, because I know Chief Mazulis, how many years you been here? 22, 23?
Almost 22.
Yeah, okay. So he's had this regional approach his whole career probably. Probably when he was about 3 years old, he's going, looking at mom and dad saying, regional, or what does he think? So I appreciate that, because that's very visionary, but trying to build those alliances, like, for example, we reached out to the city when, they were talking about their bus program and building a yard, and so I said to the city manager, please include us, and it was, of course. So we connected their person with our person, Ed, to try to structure that, build that, and sometimes they're great ideas on the front side, and then it's like, I don't know that we're aligned, and then we're waiting for them going, hey, how can we help? We'll help fund the capital part, but we need a bigger shop, and we can get our rigs in there and share some services. So we're always looking for those opportunities, you know. Northern Arizona, it's hard to get services up here. It's a beautiful place to live. There's all kinds of outdoor amenities. I think we're all healthy up here, fresh air, except for Flagstaff sending us smoke, like tonight. Getting text by the police chief, where's the smoke coming from? Because he's not getting that. But I think, we're always looking for those opportunities, and Ed's the perfect person, but it just takes that alliance, you know, talking to the Verde Valley chiefs, talking to the city. So as those opportunities come, boy, we'll seize them. We're poised, but, you know, different players. So we're trying to build those.
Thank you. And thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Chief, if you're complete with yours, Chief Mazulis, then we'll go back to the chief.
Yes.
All set. Thank you very much for your presentation. Chief Trotwine?
All right, thank you, sir. So to finish off the chief's report, we have a few more items. And, one of them is, our strategic plan, and we talked a little in the budget workshop about how the strategic plan lines up, budgeting. So, the program we're using to really track this, you can see on the left column, obviously, is our 9 main goals, which under those goals, there's strategies and then action items, and then ultimately tasks. Really gets down into the weeds on how we accomplish that. But here's the kind of graphic you're gonna see, and again, as Heidi spoke earlier, what our goal is when staff is prompted to put their updates in of progress in each of these areas, we're trying to structure that. Then when we give a quarterly report, we'll give you a pretty accurate graphic, and we can look at these. So you see up at the top of the graphic, see the status pending and the percentage, and then what's on track, where there's some disruption, major disruption. I was trying to think, maybe Heidi, you can weigh in here, what's like an idea of a major disruption? I was trying to think of an example on that.
So in my update, I have found a couple of areas where there was a major disruption, and that where our original plan, even if it was a 5-year plan, we had to completely rethink our strategy on it, on that goal, due to the situation, and COVID was a major disruptor in that. So as we're looking at, in some of those pieces of trying to look at our capital planning or our fiscal outlook and setting up what our plan is gonna be to do a 3 to 5 year redo of the economic study. So that's one of those pieces that we put into our actions under the goal of fiscal responsibility. Might not be really a great idea to do an economic study, even though we're 3 years in right now, when most of the recent data is impacted by COVID. And so as economists figure out what are real projections so that you can plan ahead, we've called that a major disruption in our plan to go forward with that action, because we're not seeking bids, we're not asking that, we're not gonna fulfill that portion of the plan. It's when we've had to stop a process because we couldn't move forward. I don't know if it's reflected in here, but a similar major disruption was in the planning for Station 4, for that Station 4 rebuild for a good year and a half. Our contractor, who we were seeking information from for a feasibility study, was off-grid. They weren't available to answer our questions. So that, to me, is a major disruption when the answer is there's no update. Ed's having that with the truck vendor. There's no update to the update to the update. There's no update.
What is status pending?
Status pending means that these are where we hit that deadline, where we had some vacations and pieces in, so that the first round of updates, they haven't been able to log in and complete those updates yet. So, and that is largely those who had task items, operational people who had task items that weren't able to fulfill it before we needed to do this work.
And like, if you looked at goal 7, maintain a safe, operational, mission-driven fleet management program, like I said, as Ed's getting in there and doing updates on that, he's gonna list challenges, you know, with parts and supply chain, and why we've had a command vehicle sitting somewhere for months because we can't get the flight package, which they're nowhere in the world, or they're out in that cargo ship in the ocean doing circles for months. So, and like he says, he doesn't understand, I don't either, I don't know that any of us do. So, and then the major disruption, I want to highly make a point on that, because remember, we work on these strategic plans, we address the whole organization, every component of it, but there's a flexibility component. So in other words, if we had one of these where there was a major disruption that would block it from like, wow, we can't ever accomplish it. It doesn't necessarily have to be fiduciary, but it could be for various other reasons. That's when as staff, and we're doing updates, there's gonna be notes in there saying, you know, I think we need to meet and we need to restructure this because, you know, goals, they have to be attainable at some point, right? It might take a while. There might be short, you know, medium, long, we all talk goals, but if there has to, we want black and white, we want direction, we want goals and objectives, but just a flexibility component. So what we don't want is a major disruption where we go, oh, we're just gonna discount that goal because we'll never attain it for these reasons. Well, then let's restructure it and update it.
Well, and a major disruption doesn't have to be that it's the end game of that goal. It's a major disruption. We want our contributors to note when there is one. We don't want it to be a feared thing to say, I've encountered a major disruption. We put it in the notes. It ultimately gets to Chief Troutwine's view as he sees every update that comes through. And then we can rally. We can come up with, well, what's an alternative? Is it just this major disruption? Disruption means we're not on track, but we can recover. It's just not in the same timeline. So we adjust the timeline. It allows us to make adjustments, but I don't want to look at that, even though it's red. We don't want to be afraid of putting that into this plan. You should be able to see where we have to adjust and have it be real. So, rather than us just pretending, oh, everything's on track, I meant we would do it in 9 months. We'd rather report that out so you can see it, and see that the work is being done in reevaluation.
Right. I'm sorry, was there another question on that? All right, so I saw your hand.
Oh, I do have another question.
Okay.
Well, it's more a comment because this is going to be available to the public, right? The goals, just the goal section, not the progress. That correct?
So we can create a dashboard that would show the progress as well as the goals.
Okay. So just a suggestion then, that given that our focus is serving the public, I would like to suggest that you reorganize the list of goals so that it's focused on the things that the public is interested in first, rather than some of the things that, like, building a culture to reduce injuries and negative impacts is wonderful when we're looking internally. But, and I'm a member of the public, I'm really much more concerned with the community risk reduction activities, protecting lives and property safety, and when they look at these, to read priority based on what's number one. So just a suggestion.
Yeah,
Reorder.
we definitely can evaluate that. And if you look through all 9 of these, if you look at the strategies and everything, you know, too, we cover kind of every aspect of the district too, right? Some of it's internal, and some of it's external, like you pointed out. So, yeah, and when as we develop that new website, you know, what I picture is this kind of data and dashboard is available.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you can click and get the full strategic plan. Anybody across the world, even Germany, can click on the site. So that's why earlier when I showed a little pinch of excitement about a new website, because I'm picturing, like you've shared, having that information available to the community and the public, and seeing actually, we're doing this stuff. So then you can see the big progress, half moon there in the middle, 11%, you know, and again, we could have a year where some of that stuff is pushing pretty hard or it's a little slower, so, but I think it's nice to see that. And then, each of these goals has an owner, there's people responsible for different components of the strategy, the action items, and then what happens, the staff, you get those people that have that ownership, they get a prompted email saying, hey, it's time to do your action items for your areas. Then you log into the system, you provide your notes, then if you go up for, you know, the actions, people in charge of the strategies, and then on me at the top, I can go through and look at progress, or make a note to that note, or look at the edit and go, oh, I wonder why Ed put that, I better put that on a note when I meet with them this month and find out what's going on with that. So, it's a pretty good tool, and again, our goal is to get all the information updated prior to when we do a quarterly update here, so we get a better, you know, more detailed graphic for the board. Any questions on this? Excellent. Moving along, Station 4 construction. So, I do have as requested, a general draft timeline. So I want to structure several areas and give you in months kind of what we're looking at. So there's 3 sections here, components of it. First one, and the milestones in the first one have to do with the phase 1 and phase 2 feasibility study. So we're currently at the phase 1, and this timeline was developed from the end of March all the way through what the project would be projected. And obviously, there's things that could inflect on it, but that first area is phase 1 feasibility, then we evaluate, and we go to a phase 2 feasibility. The phase 2 is a little more in depth, where we're looking at the property more in depth with utilities and easements and all that. The second component is the pre-construction, and oh, by the way, that first area, we're suspecting around about 2.5 months, 2 1/4, 2.5 months, would be a general timeline on that, the different components of it. Second area is the pre-construction, or the design build section, which there's a couple of main components. One's the selection of the builder and pre-construction contract negotiations, and then the timeline for pre-construction services or the design build. So that second section, the first section's about 2 1/4, 2.5 months. Second section estimate would be about a 3-month period. And in those 2 sections, obviously in parallel, as we're working in the first section, our internal team, we're getting some good sample RFPs, so we can then customize and pick components that will be good for our scope of work and RFP. So you have those first 2 sections moving forward. One's about 2 1/4, one's about 3 months. And then in parallel, of course, to get there, we're already having one of our members get some good sample so we can go through and develop a good solid RFP in parallel with that. Then, of course, you get to the construction. This estimate was about 10 months. You know, I looked at, talked to several different builders that do basically all the fire stations in the state. There's 3 main builders. And, looking at some of those projects, I was seeing time frames, build times, anywhere from, 8, 9 months on the really short side to 13, 14 months. So that's all around a year. I mean, for this 10 months on a construction, that's about right, I suppose, when you take those first 2 components. I'll string that together with the number of months that is when they get into your 10 months. Again, a lot of those projects I looked at that are being built down the valley, down south, there's a lot of development, areas like Gilbert, Queen Creek, where it's flat, open agricultural land that they're putting housing tracts in. In parallel, they're building fire stations and schools, and so some of the infrastructure's already in, like streets, sewer, utilities, but one flat piece of dirt that's an acre, and you look at a builder and say, go, it's a little less complex than us doing demo and looking at how that's graded and looking at that property and all the complexity that we have. So, again, what I wanted to do when I went to a vendor to kind of help me with a general timeline, we identified those 3 main sections, putting it more in months, I think is the way to think about it. And then it gives more an idea of the timeline we're on right now. And again, the stage and build isn't a part of our fiscal year budget discussion because it's on the capital side. We've been, saving on the capital side. So as we go down that build process, then we'll have more in-depth financial discussions on what's that look like in terms of the finance, and how we're gonna structure that. So are there questions on that?
I don't think there's any questions. It's just a comment in that gives us a good sense of where we're at, and to say that phase 1 and 2 by the end of the year is highly likely before you get into the construction phase, which could very well be completed by the end of the following year or the very first part of the year thereafter. It gives us a sense that, okay, we've got something here. That in of itself is makes me feel a whole lot better.
I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we'll keep you posted. We'll keep walking that down. If things change or improve or even get shorter, that'd be great, right? And again, I think I'm excited. I think there's a lot of dynamic things going on in the fire district now, and a lot of new and fun stuff, websites, apparatus. I'm excited about the developments we're doing in CRR, and those are reflecting in the budget. The whole idea about budget, strategic plan, well, we look at our CRR goals, and it's a critical area for us now in the district. And so we'll keep you posted as we move forward. Next item here was the purchase order. So we had the Trifecta Networks firewall, Bob purchased a couple firewalls to update. It seems like we're getting a lot of, I don't know the technical term, but challenges to our firewalls. So he wanted to update that, keep our system and security safe. Obviously, if you get what looks like a suspicious email, don't click and open it. What we do is we'll push it to the help desk or push it to Bob, and I've gotten those and say, hey, Bob, this doesn't look right. He's like, yeah. And then in some cases, he can track that down and try to get back, backtrack the IP address and whatever he does, the technician guru stuff. But lately, we've been getting a lot of hacking attempts and challenges. So please, again, in the normal day-to-day business, we all know what emails look like and proper headers. And if it looks weird, it probably is weird, So this was an important purchase, and our IT division did a really good job of gaming that out, doing an improvement there while we're getting these technical challenges. So the correspondence thank you letter, which is always nice to hear from our committee on that, and it's much appreciated. Not have any donations. This slide here, we wanted to kind of change the optics for you as we looked at, our social media. And I know it's pretty small print for me back here. I'm kind of in the same boat as Ed after I did my annual physical. I think him and I are tracking quite well, but he's a much younger man, so. Anyway, you can see kind of the optics of this as we report out. We're trying to look at ways to improve the chief's report, provide things like this that makes it a little more interesting, but it gives us a better picture of, you know, some of the things that we're doing out there. I think that was the end of the fire chief's report. Pending any questions?
For the chief? Nope, no questions. I think that's it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Next item up on the agenda is, discussion possible action in regards to Pierce pumper apparatus purchase. I believe that's gonna be Ed, but Chief, did you wanna open it up, or?
Yes, it is gonna be, Ed, and I'm gonna defer to him to explain all that, make comments as needed.
Okay, so, as part of our fleet replacement program that is integrated into the capital plan, we've got a type 1 apparatus scheduled for this year and one for next year. What we do when we have an apparatus replacement is we'll establish a committee, and it may be some recycled folks from the last time. We try to bring some new and old together, so we perpetually keep it going where guys have a good idea of what's going on and how we build stuff. So, many months ago, we got the committee going. B.C. Cochran headed the committee up, and then, with Mike Sheehan, and then we had a group of engineers. And, I can't even begin to explain the work they put into it. I mean, from visiting other districts to talking to the manufacturers to the goods and bads of our current engines, you know, and what works with what, and hey, we should have made this cabinet 2 inches longer, and so on and so forth. And, just a ton of work into everything. And then an additional challenge is we wanted to build something that works at all our stations, because our fire apparatus aren't necessarily married to a station. The desire is to have them work throughout the district. And so we have some height considerations and length considerations and things like that. The other pieces of it are, approach and departure angles, and turning radius. You know, our guys just looked at so much stuff. And then, so just one specific note on height. We're going down the road of getting like chassis to the ones we currently have. Now, they're all the same manufacturer, but, you know, they've got the XLT, the Lariat, and the Kings Ranch, and we just weren't coming in at the height we wanted, and we couldn't figure it out, and one of our engineers really got nerdy with the specs and realized that they have 2 frame rail options for the truck. One's 13 inches and one's 10 inches. And it was an aha moment for us, because it dropped that truck by that much just by recognizing that. And it's not something intuitive for a lot of us to think of the down to the frame rails, but that's what our guys did, is they dug it down to the frame rails. And so that got us a height where we wanted it to be. And then our current apparatus, we're configured for a big hydraulic pump for all of our extrication equipment, for example, that requires a different compartment that's separate from other gear, because they always leak oil and things like that. Well, our new extrication equipment's electric, so that compartment can change. So they thought about the stuff we carry and what the potential is for the future on how we configure these apparatus. And then, as important, or I'd argue more importantly, we said, hey, Mike, is this the motor you want? Is this the pump system you want? And these apparatus will be spec'd the same pump system as our engines at Station 3 and Station 1, so Mike, he's working on the same truck, you know, from more or less. And then for our engineers, if they're moving around to different stations, it's the same system. And so you don't have to memorize 5 systems, which at 3 in the morning, you know, okay, oh no, this one you pull, you don't push, you know. And so our guys, hats off to them, they did such a good job of thoughtfully spec'ing the apparatus. And so where they landed, ultimately, it's a work truck. It's an XL model of the Ford Series. But it also adopts the clean cab concept, and which is keeping our gear out of where the guys ride to reduce the risk of cancer. It adopts, you know, airbag safeties, a lot of the rollover protection, a lot of the enhanced safety features, and a lot of the new requirements from the NFPA. And going back to strategic planning, that's one of our key drivers for fleet, is to maintain a fleet that is NFPA compliant. That's what this replacement does. And, you know, the other big component to this request is both these apparatus have been identified as requiring more maintenance and upkeep, and there's system failures, and there's systems that are more difficult to replace. And just by the nature of technology, they have a less sharp turning radius. They don't have the electronics and the diagnostics. When Mike's working to fix a truck, our Pierce apparatus, he can plug in, and the manufacturer can look at the apparatus from out of state and say, oh yeah, it's an RG9 code, you need to try this, this, and this, versus having to send it to a shop right away. He might be able to diagnose and fix it in-house. So there's a ton of reasons, practically, and why we were requesting the replacement. Now, as I mentioned, we have one scheduled for this year and one next year. And once we got to a point where we had a really good idea of what we wanted and what would work for the district, they go to preliminary drawings with the manufacturer. And then get to a point where we're like, okay, we got an idea with the truck, and we get some preliminary pricing. Then they hit us with, it's gonna be 21 to 25 months build time. And that's when I approached the chief. I said, hey, this truck is now gonna be way out of its replacement schedule, but if we were able to get the one scheduled for next year, this year, it will actually be on time. And it will also allow us to move those apparatus to a reserve status and get one that is in reserve status out, because it is she's tired. And so, and then in addition to that, we were on track. There was no sense of urgency, and the manufacturer hit us last month. Oh, by the way, end of April, cost goes up $60,000 per truck because we got a reassessment of aluminum prices. And then my concern is, and the reason why I'm requesting on behalf of the district that we make the purchase of both apparatus is, I don't have a good feeling that prices are doing anything but going up. And I don't want to speak, I can't speak intelligently about the financial perspective, so I'm going to turn that over to Gabe, because he's the brain.
Well, thanks, Chief Mazulis. Yeah, so, I would agree. I mean, we would like to say, prices are gonna not continue to go up. I hope at a minimum, we sustain. I doubt we're gonna see any decline in pricing anytime soon. And so from a financial perspective, this is obviously, you know, we're moving, you know, one kind of up in our capital plan, but again, it goes back to the importance of the capital plan. It's designed to be fluid. It's designed to be, you know, it's designed so we don't find ourselves in positions where we have to wait or plan or move things ahead because we don't have the money. So we definitely do have the cash on hand for this purchase. Looking at the proposal that came through, it does come with a 5% prepayment discount, which obviously I'm sure our legal counsel want to make sure we've got performance bonds in place and things like that before we did something like that. Looking at what we've earned on our money in the county over the last 2 years, we're earning about, well, at the highest, we're earning 1%. This year, we're closer to more like 0.2%. So as much heartburn as it gives me to part with that large amount of cash, but not see a product for an extended period of time, the savings on the purchase definitely warrants, I think, going down that road. I think I do want to just add, we have some things, you know, on the horizon, both with Station 4 and the communication infrastructure, that maybe we may look at least purchasing something else down the road of one of those items. But I think, looking at these trucks, I think it's okay to go ahead and just, you know, pay cash, receive the discount for them, given
Any questions for Chief Mazulis or, Gabe?
So what will be the ongoing timeline for this project?
If approved, I can't talk, hungry. Solidify the contract with the manufacturer and then go into the queue. And to Gabe's point, yeah, I've talked to other districts and there's a department down in Phoenix that had a 380-day build for a ladder truck, now been pushed out to 800 days. And so, this is territory, I don't even know if Chief Troutwine has been in his tenure with the fire service. I don't operate well in this environment because it's black and white. You make a purchase and then, and for these extended build times and everything, I would assume that, if approved, we would go to the manufacturer, solidify a contract, and speak with Mr. Whittington about, they say 21 to 25, what opportunities do we have to have a performance bond or to make sure that they stick to it?
Chief, is there, additional costs that may come down the road as a result of equipping this piece of apparatus, or is everything gonna go from the old apparatus into the new? So, Chief Troutwine actually hammered Chief Cochran and I on this one, because he was about it, and, so we currently keep all the hose and components for an entire apparatus in stock, and that's for a lot of reasons. You burn a hose on a fire, or we have our annual hose inspections, so you need something to swap out with, so we've got that. A majority of the equipment will come from the two apparatus going out of service, and then the reserve equipment would go to one of the reserve, the newer reserve, and then, Chief Cochran really thought ahead. He's like, but in 2 years, they may say that we don't use gas chainsaws anymore, we gotta go electric, so that'll just fall into an equipment purchase piece that goes down the road, but as of right now, the cost to outfit these things, be minimal. Ready? Any other questions on that? No? Okay, well, based on the presentation for this and looking at the legal's opinion and fire chief's recommendation, as well as finance, I move to approve the purchase of two Pierce Enforcer PUC pumpers EM 715s, the price not to exceed $1,493,295.02. Do I have a second?
I proudly second that.
Oh, we have two people. We got one, okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion to purchase, has been approved, so we'll move forward on that. Thank you. Last item on the agenda for this evening is the discussion of board members' fire district-related activities since the last board meeting, and I will start on my left and move towards the right. So,
All right.
that means?
That means me, yes. So, the major thing I've been doing is getting organized to, be part of the election, to run, to sit in the seat based having been elected here rather than appointed here. And, other than that, it's signing checks and paying bills and the things that, you asked me to do and I'm happy to do, so that's pretty much it.
Great, thank you. That's a lot in of itself, so. Janet, what do you got for us?
I have, nothing extra except for normal board work.
Okay, great, thank you. Gene?
Well, I have a meeting coming up with fire chief. I'm looking forward to that. And, also, I think before we leave tonight, we're going to be discussing a date next week, so we can kind of get together and go over some of the items on the budget that you had mentioned.
Right.
And with that, I have the report.
Well, two things. One, I picked up on one of the social media posts on a recent incident on Soldiers Pass Trailhead that, looked like a visitor was a little bit too anxious to get a great photo and got themselves in trouble. And, that did get some movement in the public because everybody could identify with that. Sometimes those iconic photos come at a price. But the other thing was, some conversation with some of the pilots up at the airport. Yesterday you had this, joint training system, and, they participated, and they were really, I don't know if they were pleased with themselves, but they were just pleased because it was a great interaction of, the pilots and fire crews. And I understand there was an emergency where some of the crews had to leave, because of an incident in the canyon. So, it demonstrated the cooperation. They were really wanting to share what they knew and state in aircraft, fire safety.
Feeling the thunder from next month's meeting.
Okay.
No, we did start our airport training. Yeah, we did start our airport training, yesterday, and it was great. And I'll report on it fully when we get through the cycle next month, but it's pretty neat training.
Thank you, Al. Well, that leaves it up with me, and, I just had an opportunity to work with, Chief Coyle in your absence, as it related to working with the city and gathering data for traffic accidents off-road. So we were able to move a little bit further down the road on that, so to speak, and it's always fun working with the guys. But, with that said, I'll give you a call in the morning, and we will discuss how we're gonna put this special meeting together for the first part of next week sometime, and the time we need and resources, and we'll get that moving. So with that said, once again, thanks all the staff for all their hard work to date for the budget. And, with that said, thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.